Good morning, everyone. This is the House Judiciary Non-Civil Committee. We've got several bills on the agenda. Let me give you what I think is a best guess on how we're going to take the bills. My sense is that we have two bills in Senate Bill 400 and 391 that can be disposed of in fairly short order. 498 is up in the air as we speak, so I think after 391 and 400 we will go ahead and take 454. Representative Lindsay is here to speak to a portion of that bill. I know he's got to get back as well to another commitment. That would be followed by Senate Bill 308, and I've told Senator Seabaugh that schedule. He's on a 5-minute call for that, so we would probably go ahead and take 5 minutes and give him a call to come down, and then we'd get to Senate Bill 42 after that. So that is what I think is how I think we're going to proceed, subject to events that I have not anticipated. So, Senator Crosby, thank you so much for being here today, and let's call Senate Bill 400 first. Thank you, Senator.
Favorable consideration.
This is subject matter that we have seen before. Let me just get to it in my folder. Do you want to refresh our recollection on it, Senator, or do you want to turn it over to Ms. Howell? Or
We'll let Ms. Howell speak to it.
Ms. Howell, fire away.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This bill addresses the issue of credit for time served for designated felons. It allows provisions that for the moment that they're detained, they would be given credit for the time that they serve in detention. There are code sections on the books now that allow credit for time served for all adults. So we're looking for some parity for juveniles, and then it's also a management issue for us. If there are no changes in sentencing patterns, we anticipate that we'll be able to manage or save about 50 to 60 beds, which allows us to manage our population. We anticipate there is growth in this population. Designated felons are currently 90% of our secure population. So this would help us in managing our population. One additional note in relationship to this, I know this came up on the floor when a similar bill was addressed. We don't anticipate immediately releasing anyone. It just would allow us to calculate their release date when they would be eligible. So there would not necessarily be an immediate release of youth. It would just allow us in the calculation of their time to determine when they would be released. The additional provision, which is in Section 2 of the bill, addresses the short-term sentence that was previously 60 days, and last session there was legislation passed to reduce it for 30 days with a sunset provision. This was a cost-saving measure for us. It's about $8 to $10 million if it goes back to 60 days, and we are asking for an extension on that sunset provision because we don't have the budget funds to increase our population at this time. The language in Section 2 currently says 2012. When you passed this bill in its form in House Bill 1144, you increased it to 2013, and we would ask for that additional time just so that we're not back here next year asking for the same extension, because we don't anticipate having that $8 to $10 million again.
Just for clarity for members, we are looking at the original bill, Senate Bill 400 LC 294229S. And if I understand correctly, the request and by DJJ with the agreement from the authors to change the date on line 42 from 2012 to 2011.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes,
No, I'm sorry. 2013.
I mean 2013. I apologize. Questions? Ms. Abrams?
At the appropriate time, I'd like to be recognized for a motion.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the author or of Ms. Howell from DJJ? Seeing none, Representative Abrams.
I'd like to move to pass of SB 400 LC 294229S and to make an amendment at the appropriate time.
Move to pass Senate Bill 400 LC 294229S by Representative Abrams, second by Representative Levitas. Are there any amendments, Ms. Abrams?
Line 42, strike 2012 and insert 2013.
Ms. Abrams proposes an amendment line 42, striking 2012, inserting 2013 in its place. Any objection to the amendment? Any objection to the amendment? There's no objection to the amendment. The amendment is adopted. Any further amendments? Seeing none, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the lady's motion signify by saying aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Senator Crosby, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee.
Thank you.
Let me ask Senator Underman to come forward on Senate Bill 391. 391. Would remind members that we examined this legislation at our last meeting. It's my understanding that we've got mutual agreement to that we're going to hold off on consideration of the amendment as it was proposed, and that we're going to simply address the underlying bill.
That's true. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I believe, is Dr. Sheffield? Have members of the department here, and yes, sir, I appreciate you putting it back on the agenda, and we're going to go back to the original Senate Bill 391, which is LC 294206 S as in Sam. And as y'all recall, some of you were in the committee meeting, some of you were not. This is children that are found incompetent to stand trial on criminal charges to be placed in a highly secure community residential setting for evaluation, and this is done for expediency and also for cost savings to the state of Georgia. It's estimated to cost $575 per day in an an adolescent unit, and if we go to a community setting, it would be $223 cost savings per day per child. And the department is here, and
Would the department like to comment on the bill?
Sure, thank you, Chairman. The members of committee, my name is Consuelo Campbell, Director of External Affairs for the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. This is a small population of youth that we serve every year. These are children who are currently receiving forensic service who have been found incompetent to stand trial and are sent to us by the superior courts to be restored to competency so that they can stand trial. We are asking that statutorily we can serve this population in a secured residential facility in the community as opposed to our state mental health hospitals. There is one facility currently located down in Meriwether County, the Turner Center, and we find that facility is a center that is well able to serve our needs.
As a practical matter, is that happening now, and that we're just trying to take the statute
Yes,
and match
sir,
it up
it
to
is.
real life, or
Yes, sir, it is.
there's no prohibition on it, though, right now, is there?
No,
Okay.
there isn't.
Questions for the author of the department? Ms. Abdul Salam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
Good morning.
I wanted to ask you about the facilities themselves. Will we be allowed, or the department be allowed to use facilities that are not currently being used but are qualified to be used or certified? Would that help us at all?
Yes, I think so. Currently, because the population is so small, we're only talking about 10 youth a year.
Okay.
We don't see the need right now to expand beyond one at this point. But to answer your question, yes.
Yes, thank you.
Any further questions for the author or for the department? Seeing none, Chair will take a motion. Moved to pass by Representative Cooper of Senate Bill 391, LC 294206S. Second by Mr. Levitas. Are there any amendments? Seeing none, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the lady's motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, in light of the hearing that we had the other day, I was wondering if maybe this summer, if when y'all are meeting, that we could have Dr. Shelton come
Yes,
and give
it's a good idea.
an evaluation of where we are with the system and catch the committee up to date so that we are more educated.
It's a good idea. We'd be happy to do that. Let me ask you, I'm always a little bit behind Mr. Lafayette's requests. Who would you like to go ahead and have, do you have any plans on who should
Did you ask anyone?
carry that on the floor?
It was Representative Mark Butler.
Representative Mark Butler. All right. Does anyone have any idea who would carry Senator Crosby's bill? I don't know if Ms. Howell is still in the room or not. I think you said Oliver. Ms. Oliver? Okay, because she carried the House version. All right, let's just do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
1 minute. Let's call Senate Bill 498. Is Carlton Stewart here? Representative Lindsay, I was going to.
Oh, we'll get another bill?
Well, I think so. So,
I've got ahead of myself.
you know, it's not a problem. We yeah, right.
Thank you. Let's go.
I think so, but give me one moment. Okay. Yeah, we're going to take 498, and I'm going to wait for the principal proponent to get here. Mayor Margaret. Senate Bill 498 came to us from Representative Harbison. That, you recall, that subject matter, this is the synthetic marijuana bill. We passed the House version of that in Representative Neal's bill. Representative Harbison has graciously allowed, granted a request of Chairman Harbin to use this bill, Senate Bill 498, for a bill which was which was and still is House Bill 1440. Mr. Stewart, by Representative Harbin's request, is here to present that bill as the main proponent of the bill. Mr. Stewart, let me ask you initially who you represent in this matter, and then if you can get into as brief a summary of Senate Bill 498, which is House Bill 1440. We'd appreciate it. Then we'll take questions from the committee.
Sure.
And please, a little closer to the microphone if you could.
It's a small tobacco company out of California. The name is New Image. And what we're trying to do with this bill is simply keep tobacco wraps and cigarette wraps out of the hands of anybody under 18 years old, and to make the enforcement of that uniform by having the state do the enforcement. That's it.
So this product, a blunt wrap, which is my first interaction with that term, is something that if we would go ahead and adopt this bill, we're putting that product under the same regulation as we would with other tobacco products that come under certain regulatory restrictions enforced by the Revenue Department, et cetera. All right. Okay. Let me give members just a minute or two just to digest the bill a little bit more. Okay. Any questions for Mr. Stewart on Senate Bill 498? Again, let me say for the record that Senator Harbison has authorized the use of his bill for this particular measure. Yes, ma'am. Chairs? Oh, okay. No, not at all. Mr. Stewart, let me ask you to go ahead and repeat if you could. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. The bill keeps
a little closer to the mic if you could.
Cigarette papers, blunt wraps, which are cigar tobacco-related products, out of the hands of 18-year-olds, 18 or under, and it simply makes uniform the enforcement of that regulation by the state. That's all it does.
Any questions? Okay. Any questions? Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask a question about Section 2 of the bill. That indicates that the General Assembly is going to regulate this article completely, and that no county or municipality shall adopt or enforce any ordinance or regulation inconsistent with this article. Correct. What's the purpose of that?
So that you don't have, if an ordinance pops up in one city, and we have quite a few, 564 thereabouts, and 159 counties, then you have inconsistent enforcement. And all we're trying to do is make sure that we know who's enforcing it, what the rules are, and how to comply with it, especially with respect to convenience stores and that sort of thing.
This seems to deal with a section of the code, and this is the first time I've seen this. I apologize, but we didn't see this. Would this prohibit in any way municipalities or counties from making any type of smoking regulations that may be more restrictive than state regulations, or somehow affecting?
Well, Representative, I don't know if I can answer that because smoking regulation goes beyond the count of this bill. But I would say that I don't think we could restrict the legislature from doing whatever they wanted to do with respect to that. If I was involved with the smoking ban, representing the Heart Association among others, and I don't think that that it would have that kind of. But of course, if you choose to do so, as a legislature.
I'm just wondering what the reason was if we're having a problem.
To make it uniform. Sometimes we try to avoid problems. Thank you. Thank you.
I know some lights are probably for a motion. Let me just, if you have a question, please raise your hand. Mr. Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is part of code section I've not dealt with this is my sixth session down here. I do just have a couple questions. Are you trying to address the sale and distribution of, or does this address the possession of? If someone had something that, if they used tissue paper or something to wrap a cigarette or that kind of object, I mean, in terms of what's being regulated by the state and what's being made illegal, is it just that which is commercially available in a retail environment?
Absolutely.
Okay. And I hear that's your intent. No, I'm not sure that I see the context in which this sits in our code. How can you make me comfortable that there's not unintended consequences, that this doesn't broaden that and it deals with that which is not commercially available? Is there? And I say that because when I see Title 16, Chapter 12, it says relating to the sale or distribution to or possession by minors. I'm trying to be comfortable this only deals with sale and distribution.
That was the intent of the bill, and that's my understanding. That only absolutely deals with sale and distribution.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know.
Well, let me get to some other questions, and maybe that can clarify as we go along. Ms. Abrams.
Actually, if you can pass me and come back to me, I want to
Sure.
check one quick thing.
Sure. Mr. Ramsey.
I kind of have some similar concerns about Section 2. I was with you in Section 1, and I guess maybe you can explain this a little bit more to me. But by regulating the sale and distribution, the way that language reads, if a municipality wanted, through its zoning powers, to prohibit a tobacco shop from a development as being approved, prohibit a tobacco shop from being located next to a daycare center, would this language prohibit them from doing that because it's regulating the sale of cigarettes and tobacco-related products?
But I think in your example, it regulates the location, not the sale or distribution.
But what if they're doing it because of the product that is being sold, because they don't think it fits necessarily in the character of a given location that they're approving a given project?
But again, I think that goes to location and not to sales and distribution.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Cooper. I'm sorry, Ms. Benfield.
Yeah, I just want to know, who's the Senate sponsor?
Ed Harbison. This is Ed Harbison's bill.
And you're representing
him because he can't come down.
Oh, so you're not representing an interest? You're not lobbying on behalf of?
Yes, I am.
Yes, he is. I mean, this may have been said before you came in. No, it's all right. Senator Harbison's underlying bill is subject matter that we already passed out in a bill by Representative Neal having to do with synthetic marijuana. This is a vehicle for House Bill 1440 by Chairman Harbin that Senator Harbison has permitted to be used as a vehicle for this bill. Mr. Stewart represents, I forgot the name of the company, but an interested in this bill. Representative Harbin, Chairman Harbin, has asked Mr. Stewart to present this bill on his behalf because he's obviously working on the budget right now.
And what's
So,
the company?
New Image Tobacco.
It's a tobacco company.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Knox. Hold on. Let's get a chair. Mr. Knox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I've got a couple of questions, if I may, Mr. Chairman, on this issue.
Mhm.
Am I on?
You should be.
Hello? Okay. Yeah, I'm just not sitting close enough. I guess my first question is, what is it about blunt wraps that engendered the need for this change in the current current code that we have with respect to cigarettes and tobacco or tobacco products? Cigarettes means any type of tobacco or tobacco product in the current law. What is it about blunt wraps that would...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chairman Knox. Can I ask the room? There are a lot of people in this room, and I need quiet. I just absolutely need quiet. If you've got to say something, please get up and go. I apologize, Chairman Knox.
Okay. My question, I'll restate it. My question is, what is it about the product blunt wraps that is not included in the previous code section definition of cigarettes, which means any type of tobacco or tobacco product?
I think they're making a distinction between a cigar wrap and a cigarette or cigarette paper. And that's the only distinction. And of course, with everything there becomes colloquial uses for different types of products, and this happens to be one.
With respect to then on line 37 in section 2, where we're going to prohibit a county or municipality from enforcing any ordinance or regulation that's inconsistent with this article, that means any regulation or ordinance that was previously in force, as well as ones they may seek to enforce with regard to blunts or anything else. Isn't that wouldn't that be a retroactive application of this code?
Not necessarily, because it's only going to apply to sales or distribution going forward, not things that happened in the past.
Well, I don't mean to argue with you or debate it, but this says it shall not adopt or enforce, and you can't enforce something that isn't already in law.
Correct. But
So
they only can do it going forward as opposed to going backward. They're not going to go back under this particular legislation, go back and do anything to anybody who's had something in place before.
All right. Now, how does one last question, Mr. Chairman? How is it that this product contains less than 50% tobacco? What does that mean exactly?
I think it's just a general definition, and I think it was taken from the former code section that this was adopted from. But it could be 50% or less. It's not necessarily a cigarette, and it's not necessarily a cigar. It's a wrap. It's a paper wrap, like a cigarette paper.
So there's nothing in it. It's just just the outside.
Just the outside.
Okay, and so this would be a wrap that is tobacco and something else.
It's a roll your own.
It's a roll your own. Okay, and this wouldn't be considered. Is this a cigar wrapper?
It's a cigar wrapper.
Okay. I don't see really any enforcement mechanism in the form of a penalty or other constraint for not complying with it. Is there one, or did we just forget to put one in? Is there one?
No, it's in the other parts of that article, the prohibited acts and the enforcement, sales from vending machines, posting of signs. All of that is in other parts of this article.
Cigarette wrapper prohibited. Under 18.
Let's see. Person who violates one of the subsection is the sale, and that's a misdemeanor, so that's the clerk that sells it. Then a minor who has attempts to purchase or has professionally used cigarettes or tobacco-related objects that their parent hasn't allowed them to have, by requiring forms of community service not exceeding 20 hours, requiring lectures about the use of smoking and tobacco use, or both of those.
Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the first part of the bill, but I share Mr. Ramsey's concerns about Section 2 and those of Mr. Thompson, because what this is essentially saying is that a locality cannot enforce stronger laws. They cannot make any laws that are stronger than those passed by the General Assembly, which is inconsistent with the general posture of this body, which usually sets a standard, but we rarely prohibit local governments from exercising home rule and taking into account very specific local issues. And so I would be deeply concerned about the adoption of Section 2. I think Section 1 makes sense, and I think when Mr. Stewart referred to the colloquial uses, for example, in Atlanta, these blunt wrappers are used for blunts for marijuana, and so you're attempting to regulate the sale of a product that is being misused fairly egregiously. And so I do think it's important to specifically include this because it does have a specific colloquial use that's in play right now. But I would share the concerns about Section 2 and its force and effect.
Ms. Abdul-Swan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Abrams pretty much summed up most of my concerns. I was just going to say for those that are wondering why that would be important, the convenience stores sell tons of blunt wraps to underage people knowing that they're going to use them for drugs. That's what the nice words that they're trying to avoid saying. You use these wraps to roll marijuana and other various substances in it. So I too agree with Section 1 of the bill. I do have some concerns, though, Mr. Stewart, about Section 2 as well.
I sense a pattern emerging. Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that, I pulled the code section and looked at it, and in this chapter, there are also provisions about how close you can sell tobacco products to parks and schools and other types of things, which I think would, in effect, say whatever the state law is on that is the limits, and a local government could not require it to be further from a school or further from a park.
Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this may have already been answered. I just was trying to get it. In the current code, it says tobacco-related products means papers, wrappers, or other products. And now we're just adding including blunt wraps. What was the distinction, and it's already been said, I apologize, but what's the distinction between these and why aren't they already covered?
I think they are. We're just trying to make it clear. It's just the words are just not there, but it is. It's our interpretation, but that it doesn't specifically talk about blunt wraps, which again there's a distinction between cigarette papers and blunt wraps.
Okay, but
one is more cigar
right
type of wrapper as opposed to cigarette paper.
But and I'm assuming this being current code, it says wrappers, which to me would already encompass this. And I mean, has there been a case that has said no, this doesn't fall under it? Or I mean, are we just? I mean, I'm trying to sort of understand why we're here.
I'm not aware of one.
Mr. Setzler, and then we'll close off questions and get to a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a question for council. What by local ordinance, what kind of penalties could a municipality bring against a minor? If, for example, I see Section 2 is seeking to prohibit local governments from being able to have more stringent rules regarding the regulation of tobacco. That's why I think we read this. If a municipality wanted to, just hypothetically, wanted to lower the boom on kids using tobacco products or buying these things, what is within the powers of a local government in Georgia to do? What kinds of things are really on the table?
Let me ask Mr. Baggett to answer that question. He's probably in a better position. He's standing right there conveniently. Mr. Baggett, would you care to? Do you mind if I put you on the spot?
The Home Rule Act that affects municipal authority says that we can't make anything a criminal offense by ordinance that's already been defined as a crime by the General Assembly. So with respect to criminal prosecutions, unless there's a statute that gives us the specific authority to have a separate and distinct ordinance with criminal penalties, that because this is in Title 16 and we'll be adding it to the misdemeanor provisions in this code section, there will be no criminal punishment we could hand out that's already been defined as a crime. The issue with preemption in that section will be about things like location and other sort of more civilly natured type municipal regulations. But once something is a misdemeanor in Georgia, there can be no criminal punishment via a municipal ordinance unless there is a specific statute and grant of authority to the city from the General Assembly.
So, short of a criminal statute, could you by ordinance levy fines of some kinds? Kids that are, I don't even know if that would ever be contemplated. The kid that's busted with cigarettes has got to pay a $100 fine. What's? I just want to make sure I understand this before amendments are offered to keep Section 2 in or take Section 2 out. I want to understand what's really on the table in terms of what it's tried to accomplish and what, you know.
My understanding of the law and what I advise cities is if the conduct you are trying to proscribe in a criminal type ordinance is already a misdemeanor or felony, you do not have, under the Home Rule Act 1965, which is in Title 36, the authority to enact an ordinance to impose any kind of criminal punishment for that behavior. Because otherwise we would be making something an ordinance violation with lesser penalties. It'd be like us adopting a municipal murder ordinance.
No, but not I'm not talking about criminal treatment, but a fine of some kind, or I'm grasping for the term here. And Mr. Chairman, if it's a moot point, we can move on.
Quick question. Ms. Abrams and Mr. Ramsey, let me ask you to if we can make it as quick as possible. Ms. Abrams.
Absolutely. Just to respond to the concern raised by Representative Collins, the challenge we have is that in convenience stores, they are selling blunt wrappers claiming that they're not related to tobacco. And so this very explicitly lays out that they are, because they're not always, you've got companies that are producing these things, they don't call it a tobacco product, but you know what it can be used for. It's paper that's used for drugs, but there's nothing that says it's used for drugs. You just know that's what it's used for. So this, I think, calls out explicitly in the code that blunt wrappers are impermissible for the purposes that they have to be treated like anything else, because it's not sold just as a cigar. They're packets that are sold, and it's for the use of drugs, but it's not a drug-related product because it's just paper. And so I think that while I tend to hesitate to you guys know I vote against lots of laws, but this I think, I know. But I think this section 1 is fairly relevant, especially in the metro area where this is a very prevalent problem.
Sure.
But have we had a challenge that says that somebody's been, an ordinance or a violation of selling these where wrappers has not stood up?
I don't know that we've had that challenge, but the issue for our law enforcement, I would imagine, is going in and even saying that there's something that says it's a problem. If there's lack of enforcement to begin with, and this clearly obliges enforcement, which I think is the goal of the legislation, to oblige enforcement on its face before you get to the issue of a legal challenge.
Mr. Ramsey, last word.
I'd just like to be recognized for a motion and an amendment at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
This would be the time.
I move do pass SB 498 LC 294420S.
Mr. Ramsey moves do pass SB 49 LC 294420S. Second by Ms. Abrams. Any amendments, Mr. Ramsey?
I would offer an amendment deleting lines 31 through 38 and renumber the subsequent sections accordingly.
Mr. Ramsey proposes an amendment striking Section 2 in its entirety and renumbering accordingly. Is there any objection to the amendment? Is there any objection to the amendment? Seeing none, the amendment is adopted. Are there any further amendments? Seeing none, any further discussion? All in favor of the gentleman's motion of do pass by substitute of SB 498 LC 294420S, say aye. Opposed?
No.
Let me get a show of hands. All in favor of the gentleman's motion signify by raising your right hand, or your left hand if you prefer. Opposed? And the motion is adopted.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
I'm going to
Chairman.
make the assumption that Representative Harbin would carry this on the floor.
Yes, you will.
Okay. Let me call Senate Bill 454. And again, as per the comment earlier, Representative Lindsay will be speaking to a portion of the bill. Chairman Rice. Okay, is Senator Douglas here? Perfect. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Whip, thank you for joining us this morning, and fire when ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you today Senate Bill 454, which is a bill that we're going to revise overwhelmingly with the permission of Senator Douglas here in this.
Let me ask you to pull the mic.
Yep, sorry.
Thank you.
Here in this committee. First off, let me sort of tell you that this bill has been heavily vetted already, and I thank you for vetting it further. This bill, in essence, passed out of Ways and Means Committee unanimously after extensive work. It was HB 237, I believe, at the time. Do I have the number right? 293. Sorry, at this point in the General Assembly, I don't even know my own phone number. But in any event, it was heavily vetted in Ways and Means. It got to the floor of the House. There were some last-minute concerns from the governor's office regarding one section of the bill, so we held off on passing it on day 30, and then worked with the governor's office to alleviate their concerns. And so we're coming back to you here today. What we're doing here is basically dealing with amusement machines. And I want to make a few things very clear. That which we have prohibited in the past, such as video poker games and that sort of thing, are still clearly prohibited in this bill. Nothing has changed about that. However, since we passed those prohibitions in the early part of this past decade, there's been an enormous gray area as to what can and cannot take place with these amusement machines, and has left both the owners of the machines, the store owners that put the machines in, and the law enforcement agencies around the state sort of scratching their heads and coming up with many times conflicting interpretations of what they can and cannot do. And what we're simply trying to do is bring the various parties together and come up with a bill that does two things. Number one, clarifies the law as to what is and is not legal. Clarifies who's going to be enforcing it, which is largely the Department of Revenue, in concert with local folks. Also brings skin into the game by everyone involved in the industry, from both the store owners and the machine owners. And we brought everyone to the table, and I'm very glad to tell you that we have the support of store owners. We have the support of the machine owners. The GBI has indicated its support for the bill. We've worked with DOR, and I think they've been generally supportive. And I'd like to state with the governor's floor leader here that the governor's office is also supportive of the bill. With that, let me sort of give you the details. And also, there's an added kicker here. With everyone singing Kumbaya, we're also going to add by the minimum, according to what the industry is telling me, somewhere between $20 to $30 million in state revenue gets enhanced in terms of the various fees that will be charged to both the owners of the machines and to the stores. Let me sort of walk you through it real briefly. Section 1 of the bill clarifies exactly what kind of machines that we have here. We have what are called Class A machines and Class B machines. Class A machines are the machines that you play at various locations for pure amusement purposes, and for which there is no other reward other than another play on the machine. Class B machines are those kind of machines that can also be used to reward the player with a very small cash prize of up to $5 per successful play. And we, so anyway, that's the major definitions that we have in section 1 of the machine. We then, if you look at page 1, lines 23 through 26, we also bring the amusement owners, rather the owners of the stores, into the play in terms of they will also be required to get a sticker or a license to have these machines in the store. And let me tell you how important that is. That, in effect, gives the store owners skin in the game in terms of making sure that they are operating these machines right. What we have in many parts of the state are a lot of machines that are perfectly legal. However, the store owners are choosing to operate these machines illegally. By bringing them into the licensing process, we are in effect giving them something to lose, both in terms of this license and also their liquor license and other things that they dearly do not want to depart with. I've had some firsthand experience with this sort of phenomenon when I practiced law up in Toccoa, Georgia. Before they had a legal liquor by the drink, there were a number of operations in the county that were operating illegally, providing liquor by the drink. And since they figured they were already operating illegally liquor by the drink, they can do other things illegally in those establishments, such as slot machines and other things. Lo and behold, once they passed liquor by the drink, and all the establishments were required to get a license for that, suddenly all the other illegal activities suddenly disappeared because the owners had skin in the game. They didn't want to lose that liquor license. And so that's in fact what we're seeking to do here. Section 2 of the bill basically walks through the various fees that will be charged for the kinds of licenses we're talking about for both Class A and Class B machines are being established. And basically, Class A machines for a master license ranges between $500 to $3,500, depending upon the number of machines. Stickers for the owners of the stores will be at $25 per machine. Class B licenses will require a $5,000 license. The stickers for the machines will be $125. Yeah. 5260S. I'm sorry, 28. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. That's right. I've been informed by legislative counsel that she made, as you know, legislative counsel in this group is just as good in terms of cleaning up various items as we are in civil judiciary. She has, for instance, tightened up the language.
This goes to the issue of bona fide machine and so forth, Ms. Travis?
Right.
Okay.
Is it LC
All right.
2944119S?
The copy that members have in their folders is the correct copy?
Yes.
Is the latest,
yes,
cleanest, corrected copy?
My apology. I was operating on the one I sent down here, not the one.
But as a practical matter, excuse me, if we could have one conversation at a time, that'd be great. Just to be clear for members to make sure that they're looking at the right measure. It's LC 294419S. As a practical matter, the changes that Ms. Travis has made have been in the sense of cleanup, definitions, but there's no substantial substantive changes with regard to
with one exception.
Okay,
Mr.
that's what I wanted to get to make sure that we had clarity there.
If I may, in consultation with Senator Douglas, we would like to have you remove Section 1 of the bill dealing with pull tabs, and simply we're going to deal in the House simply with the issue of the amusement machine.
And just for the record, that is with the acquiescence of the author, Senator Douglas?
I spoke with him earlier this morning, and we both agreed that we're going to simply move forward in the House with the amusement machines.
Very well. I understand that Representative Smyrie has had a similar bill somewhere.
Yes.
in the process that accomplishes Senator Douglas's goal on that. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure he's covered on that since he's been so gracious with this vehicle.
Yeah, I talked with Senator Douglas, and we talked about how we wish to move forward.
Okay.
In regards to that issue, in regards to this issue, and he has agreed to take Section 1 out
Okay.
of the bill.
That's all the way through line, Mr. Chairman, all the way through line 35 on page 2.
Yes.
Okay.
The entire Section 1.
Representative Lindsay, did you want to continue in your presentation, or are you ready for questions?
I think I'm ready for questions because that's the hardest soul of the bill. But let me also ask for you to give a moment to Chairman Rice, who spent an enormous amount of time as the chairman of the subcommittee on Ways and Means to put this bill together as well.
Well, thank you, members of the committee. It's good to be with you this morning. I think it's a long night and a longer day. I had the opportunity to be the subcommittee chairman of Ways and Means for Public Finance, and this bill was heard in Public Finance and perfected in Public Finance and effectively moved on. It didn't make it, as Representative Lindsay said. I want you to understand that I am one of the people who are totally against gambling and gambling in any form. And when the video poker debate came up several years ago, I was absolutely.
Let me ask for order at
engaged.
the table. You've got to have a conversation. I understand. That's part of the process, but I just ask you to please take it outside. Thank you, Chairman Rice. I apologize.
Thank you. I was absolutely engaged in voting against any form of video poker or anything like that. And so when this bill came to Ways and Means and I had the opportunity to chair the meeting, I was not favorably disposed to the idea as the thing started. But the more I got into it, the more I looked at this bill, I determined that there's a major difference between amusement machines and things like video poker and true gambling form, where there is some requirement for capability to play the machine with some skill. And that's the difference, basically. The difference between a lottery ticket and so there's no skill in a lottery ticket or anything like that. That's pure gambling. And so, as I went through this, I determined that what I would do is give it its fair due. And I went through it in great detail, and the committee went through it in great detail and perfected it with the representative from the industry and Mr. Lindsay. Let me just tell you that to me, the heart of this bill, there are several important points, but the heart of this bill is location license, which has to move along. And I'll tell you the reason for this. This is a vignette. 3 years ago, my wife came home to me and said she stopped at an Exxon station on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard. And when she walked in there to get something, there were people in the back playing these machines. And there were 5 machines in there. And she said, the law was actually tacked to the front of the machine with a sticky note, basically. But it looked to me like these people were getting some money, because when they went to the window to redeem their winnings, there was not necessarily a potato chip bag or anything like that they were supposed to be able to win. They actually got some cash. So I called the Gwinnett County Police, and I went to the Vice Squad, and believe it or not, yours truly went on a sting operation with the Vice Squad. It's hard to go on a sting operation when you got a legislative license plate on your car, but, so...
I just don't know where to begin with that. there are so many paths to take with that, Chairman Rice.
I would hope you wouldn't discount my testimony by my own capability. Unfortunately, the owner of the shop came out to change the price of the gas about the time I pulled up there, and I think he caught on pretty quickly. But the point is that I went in there, and it's obvious that this gas station doesn't do much business. This doesn't do much business other than what happens in the back room. And the fact of the matter is that the Gwinnett County Police have gone in there before, and they have cited him under the current statutes. But he's back in business the next day. In this particular situation, in this bill, that location license makes him just like a liquor, somebody doing liquor that can have their license lifted by the Department of Revenue's commissioner. And they can be fined in that circumstance. My guess is if this guy who was changing that sign on that gas pump and his owner ever got in a situation where their license was lifted, where they could not replace those machines the next day with somebody else's machines, which this law does not permit, the word would spread like wildfire throughout that industry that there's a new law on the block here that they've got to obey. And I think it will have an incredibly effective presence in the marketplace to cure the problems we currently have. The police in that situation told me that in many cases these convenience stores have a secondary cash reserve that's not in the cash box. It's for payouts. And they get their regulars coming through there, and they make these payouts out of the cash box, some as much as the police testified at $30,000 worth of money sitting in these folders below the in some of the high usage type areas. So on the basis of that, and the basis of the definitions that are included in this bill that draw a clear line between what an amusement machine is and what effective gambling is, I think this is a great bill, and that's why I supported it, and that's why I'm here today. And so, Mr. Chairman and the members of the committee, I'm going to take my leave and let Mr. Lindsay go through the bill with the assistance of Mr. Snyder over here. But I would encourage you to do the same thing I did and to look at this bill through those eyes. It's not gambling. It's really something that controls gambling. Thanks an awful lot for the members of the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Rice. Questions, Mr. Vice Chair?
Chairman Rice, I just wanted to clarify for myself, because I'm the same position you are about the gambling, and that I would not want to vote for a bill that in any way promoted gambling. Would this be fairly classified as an anti-gambling bill?
Oh, absolutely. The bright line here is much, much clearer. And from what the police told me, the absence of this type of a law permits them to do what they want to do the next time around. They can buy those machines from a different owner. There is no responsibility at the location at all.
Thank you.
We're trying to help out the folks who are doing this legally.
Yeah.
Ms. Abdul Salam.
Thank you, both gentlemen. We appreciate you bringing the legislation. I had a question. Well, it's a couple of questions, but they all center around the same issue. So let me tell you what the issue is that I have concern about. It's the issue of the stickers and the licenses. And maybe you can help me clarify the difference between them, because I'm looking on page 6.
I'm going to bring up Mr. Snyder.
Okay, looking on page 6, line 202. And in that paragraph, it talks about the sticker being able to be transferred from one machine to another machine. And so could you maybe clarify for me about the sticker? Is it a permanent sticker? Is it renewed annually? And the fact that it can be removed and put on another machine, does each machine require a sticker?
Can I answer?
Sure.
Okay. Yes. Under the current law, if you are the owner of the machine, you have to have the master license. And for every machine that you put out on location, there needs to be a sticker on that machine. If there's not a sticker on the machine, it can be seized by the Revenue Department, and you're violating the law. If, in fact, you have 2 Pac-Man machines and you have stickers on both of them, and then the owner of the business says, I don't want 2 Pac-Mans, I want a pinball and a Pac-Man. You can take one of the pinballs, the Pac-Mans out of service, put the pinball machine in, so now you have a pinball and a Pac-Man, and take that sticker and put it on the pinball. But anything that's out for play by the public has to have a sticker on it. And that's how the law would run. And now under this bill, the location owner would have to pay a fee, either $25 or $125, depending on Class A or B, for any machines he or she has in that location.
Okay, follow up, Mr. Chair. That does help, but it still raises the issue. If the stickers are interchangeable, how do you keep tabs on how many machines they have and what they're actually operating?
Well, there'd be in this case, there would actually be a fail-safe method, because I may have 100 machines in my inventory, but I only may have 60 machines out on location. And then I may get another customer, and I have 7 more machines to go out. Well, I'll have to buy 7 more stickers from the Revenue Department to put on those machines. At the same time, the Revenue Department will now have a list that says that Joe Blow's store owner has a license for 7 games, and these are the 7 games he has.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mrs. Cooper. All right. Mr. Knox.
Can you tell me about this? I'm having trouble deciphering Section 2,
particularly at line 57 through 61. Is that left in there as a result of having had section 1 previously, and does it need to be removed? Or
No, that's one thing. You're talking about the slot machines?
Right.
The problem is underneath the existing law, there is no good definition for what slot machines are illegal. There is no good definition of a slot machine presently in the law, and that was something when we talked with the GBI, they wanted us to go ahead and clarify the law as to what exactly under the law is a slot machine.
And is section 2 saying that that's not a permissible device
Yes.
for amusement?
Yeah, in other places of the law, that is clearly defined as something that's illegal. What we're doing simply here is simply just defining it for law enforcement.
A slot machine is a no-skill game. Every game that's an amusement machine has to have some skill in its operation.
Yeah.
So by definition, a slot machine would be illegal.
Yes, sir. Could you pull the mic?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Issue I'm having about this is why, with all the competition from games galore on the internet, why is everybody interested or excited about mechanical electronic games that they have to get in their car and go somewhere and sit down and?
I guess it's the same question as, with all the movies that I can watch at home, why would anyone go to a theater? For whatever reason, people like to go, to leave their house and go to some of these places rather than simply play with them on the computer.
And just as a follow-up, whether it's at Six Flags or Dave & Buster's or the corner convenience stores, frankly, it does bring people into the store and it does enhance other sales.
I see no further questions. I have no one signed up to speak. What is the pleasure of the committee? Move to pass by Representative Levitas of
Senate Bill 454.
Senate Bill 454 by substitute LC 294419S, second by Representative Hatfield. Are there any amendments?
Yes.
Mr. Levitas.
Move to strike Section 1 in its entirety from lines 15 through lines 35.
Mr. Levitas proposes amendment of striking Section 1 in its entirety, renumbering accordingly. Is there any objection to the amendment? Any objection to the amendment? Hearing none, the amendment is adopted. Any further amendments? Seeing none, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the gentleman's motion signify of due pass of SB 454 by substitute LC 294419S. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Thank you, gentlemen.
Mr. Hatfield asked if I was a player of these machines. Let me sort of clarify something. Actually, this is how I helped pay my way through college and law school, because my daddy owned these kind of machines, and it was the hardest work I ever had was servicing his bloody
The legacy
machines.
lives on. The legacy lives on. Representative Lindsay, will you be handling this on the floor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let's take 5 minutes, give Senator Seabaugh a call, and we'll get to Senate Bill 308. Senator Seabaugh, apologize for the delay. Multitasking, just run amok. Senator Seabaugh and Representative Horn, welcome. We're here to consider Senate Bill 308, which the intent of which is to expand Second Amendment rights in Georgia, to summarize it, in terms of its bottom line impact and the goal that I think many of us are collectively trying to reach. We had a subcommittee hearing which was chaired by Subcommittee Chair Setzler last week. Did some good work, very good work as a matter of fact. Took some public testimony, which I'm glad we did. Subsequent and passed out what I believe is a good, strong substitute bill. In the interim, as you know, Senator Seabaugh and Representative Horn, there have been many conversations about this bill, about the process on this bill, all with the common intent of moving the bill forward. Many conversations that I've had with our leadership and with the administration. At this point, my goal is to move personally, which I don't seek to impose on anybody, is to move this issue forward. and to move it forward in a way that, again, will expand Second Amendment rights in Georgia for the benefit of law-abiding citizens in our state, and I know we share that common goal. As we know in this process, the key is not so much what it is that you want, it's what it is that you can get done. And what is it that needs to happen in order for a work product to get to the next level, and then to get to the next level after that, and then ultimately to a signature. I will tell you as plainly as I can that the substitute that I have here before you is a good bill. It is a good bill. It is a good substitute. Does it go as far as I would want to go in terms of expanding Second Amendment rights, or as far as you would want to go, or you would want to go, or many of us would want to go? The answer is no. And I just need to be completely honest about that. The answer is no. But does it make significant improvements in terms of expanding Second Amendment rights, clarifying, strengthening our public gathering law, and making other improvements? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And that's the bottom line truth as well. So sometimes this process is known as the art of the possible. And this is what is possible right now in terms of the conversations that I've had with others, that we have had together. I put forward the substitute to the committee in the interest of moving this issue forward and in the interest of ensuring that it does not get stalled. Because if it gets stalled, then we have accomplished nothing. And that's what I'm not here for that. You're not here for that. We want to get something done and get something positive done. So with that, I know that a couple of major, I'd call them major, but there's certainly more significant changes that we made between the subcommittee and this committee substitute, having to do with maintaining our current policy as it relates to university systems, and of course the prohibition on within places of worship. Senator Seabaugh, if you wanted to address additional changes that you see between the subcommittee and the committee sub here, I'd also would want to ask you, I realize that it doesn't go as far as you want to go or as I want to go, but at this point, given what I've said about moving the process forward, are you in agreement that we need to take this work product, this very delicate work product at this point politically, and move it forward as is?
Mr. Chairman, I have always had the utmost respect for the process, for those that are involved in the process, which includes the chairman, this committee, the leadership on the House, and I appreciate them working on coming up with a good product. And I think what we have in the committee substitute here is a very good product, and I'm thrilled about what we have before us and what we're going to move. Hopefully, we'll move out of committee today, and so I'm very, very, very satisfied with the process and how we've been able to work in accomplishing the ultimate goal that we wanted to in clarifying this very confusing law. So, yes, sir.
I appreciate that very much, because it reflects a consensus and a dialogue and a sense of cooperation about keeping our eyes on the goal and being realistic about that. Honestly, within the political context that we're working within, and that's just the bottom line reality of this building. So your flexibility in that is appreciated. Again, speaking for myself, but probably for a majority of the members of this committee. With that said, I did mention the fact the university system put back, as it were, as well as the prohibition on houses of worship. Do you want to speak to any other specific changes within the substitute?
Not really, Mr. Chairman. I think those were the substantive changes that we have in there, and I believe that it's structured in a way that does clarify the law. It does eliminate a lot of gotcha situations, and I believe that those who are license holders in Georgia will find this at being significant improvement over what we have right now.
Let me ask you, and just to take a giant step back, we talk about something like the public gathering law, and we talk about it you talk about it in a very knowledgeable way, and I've learned a lot through this process. I had some familiarity, but certainly have gotten more familiar. I think it'd be helpful for members of the committee for you to very briefly, if you could, summarize what improvement this substitute makes with regard to the public gathering law. How is it that this substitute expands and helps Second Amendment rights on the public gathering law as opposed to where we are now with current law?
The current law that we have right now, there is a clause called the Public Gathering Clause, and in that, which defines when you commit a crime, the words exist, includes but not limited to. And so that in itself leaves the definition of if you've committed a crime or not for the determination of the courts. So we've had individuals in the state of Georgia who have thought they were obeying the law. They got arrested. They had to go to trial, had to go through the appeal process, and then ultimately to the Supreme Court to find out whether or not they were in the included to part or not. And I feel that laws in the state of Georgia should be easy to understand, and that those who want to obey the law should be able to understand what they need to do to obey the law. And that's what started this process in looking at that. And the example that I use, the courts have ruled on 4 areas of being whether it is a public gathering or not, and very few people really can make that discernment on themselves. It's like, for instance, a 4th of July picnic, a McDonald's restaurant, a Longhorns restaurant, and a shopping mall. 2 of those 4 the courts have deemed to be a public gathering, so therefore you cannot carry. If you're a licensed, if you have been licensed, you cannot carry in those places. And the other 2 have been deemed to be okay for you to carry a license. And very few people I've asked that question could get answered correctly, or which 2 have been deemed to be a public gathering, therefore a crime, and which 2 are okay to carry. And so that, Mr. Chairman, is what we want to do is in doing this is to clearly delineate where it is that those people who are properly licensed to carry a firearm can legally carry their firearm, and where it is that they cannot carry their firearm. So we eliminate the gotcha situations. The thing I would add, with this being the Judiciary Committee that understands this very well, is that with those words not limited to, there's a lot of case law that has extended that parking lots are an extension of the public gathering. So there's a lot of people that I've spoken with when they go to church, they think if they leave the gun in their vehicle and go into the church building, they think that they're safe, and when in fact they are not. They've broke the law by having that in the parking lot, and that's what we want to do is to clarify so that individuals will not get in those gotcha situations.
Thank you, Senator. Questions for the sponsor, Mr. Setzler? Chairman Setzler.
Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I'd like to be recognized for making a motion.
Understood. Thank you. Mr. Levitas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Try and make this quick as I can. I wanted to first turn to page 3, lines 95 to 96. The way I read the entire provision from 90 to 96, if I go to Representative Lunsford and he allows me to go hunting on his property and I have a handgun, I have to have it fully exposed to view. What is the reason for that?
What we, in making substantial changes in this, when it came to certain areas like carrying when you're hunting, we copied this right out of the code as it exists right now, so that we didn't get confused with making too many changes. This is in relationship to carrying a concealed weapon, so that if you're going to carry on his property hunting, at least it is an open view, so that you're not in a way carrying a gun that is concealed.
I guess my concern, and if it's not enough of a concern that I want to upset the balance of the bill, but if I'm on Representative Lunsford's property, it seems to me it ought to be up to Representative Lunsford whether or not I have that open and exposed to view. And I just wonder, is it your opinion that if we removed lines 95 and 96 that it would be subject to maybe getting red ink instead of black ink?
I would not.
Then at the appropriate time, I'd like to be recognized for a motion on that, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple of other questions, if I may.
Sure.
And I will just, by way of notice, every member of the committee, and I hope the sponsor of the bill has this as well, I'll also be moving at the appropriate time on line 111 to add language. I think it's a little bit draconian to say that if somebody gets a first offense under this statute in 2011 and picks up another one in 2031, that they're looking at a felony. So I will be asking the committee to consider language that qualifies the second offense as occurring within 5 years of the first offense or of the preceding offense. Moving over to line 199 to 200. I noticed that there's that a violation of the code section shall not give rise to a civil action for damages, and my concern there is if somebody is violating this statute and proceeds to shoot somebody, why would they not? I think an argument could be made that, well, yes, I was violating that code section when I shot you, but the virtue of the violation is not going to give rise to a civil action. Would those lines prohibit, if Representative Lunsford violated this and then shot me, would that prohibit me, which he has thought of, as every member of this committee has at various times, would that prevent me from turning around and suing him for the damage he did to me?
This part of what we put in here has gotten a lot of discussion, and I have Bill Clark with the Trial Lawyers Association we work very closely with. The realtors have worked closely. All that this is doing is saying that if you carry a firearm into these prohibited areas, that they cannot have a civil action against you for the purpose of you carrying on that property. Now, if you take a separate action that is irresponsible, this in no way changes the ability for that person to be sued for those irresponsible actions.
Okay, that's terrific. I can move on very quickly then, Mr. Chairman. Another sort of policy question for me is on line 247, why is it if I have a carry permit that if I
Sorry, where are you, Mr.
I'm sorry,
Lewis?
line 247, page 8.
Thank you.
If I have a permit and I violate the law, it's only a misdemeanor. But if I happen not to have a permit, I'm looking at 5 years as a minimum sentence. Why is that?
I would think that, and this was part of the changes that came out on the House side. But I think that the rationale behind that if you have an individual who is licensed to properly carry a firearm, and they are in the habit of carrying a firearm a lot of places, and they get into a gotcha situation, that is not as irresponsible action as someone who is carrying a gun onto campus property that does not even have a license. In the state of Georgia, you have to have a license to carry a firearm, whether it's concealed or open, anywhere other than your home or your business or in your vehicle. And so I believe that what they were trying to get in here, that if you were, for instance, the discussion we've had on this is where is Georgia State property begin and where does it end right here in downtown? Where does Georgia Tech? So if you have an individual who's legally carrying a firearm walking to the sidewalks of Atlanta, but happen on property, then it gives an opportunity for there to be a little bit less of a gotcha for that individual because they're trying to obey the law.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I do have two other quick questions. If you want me to come back, I will. Okay. Line 432, this goes to do with the mental health waiver. The applicant's only required to pay a $3 fee. I cannot conceive that it's only going to cost $3 for the making of that report. Where did y'all come up with that figure? It seems that ought to be a little bit higher.
This right here is current language that we just, in restructuring the bill, put this in there. This is exactly out of the code as it exists right now for the mental health language that is in the code. This is an area that we did not want to try to change in any way.
And again, I mean, it's not a great heartache for me, but we just need to understand that we're now asking taxpayers to pay for that rather than the applicant, because there's no way that $3 is going to come close to covering anything. So I, just throw that out for whatever it's worth, which may not be a whole lot. The last question I have, Mr. Chairman, and to the author of the bill, is on lines 824 to 826. Am I correct in reading that you can carry on a bus, aircraft, rail, as long as you have a firearms permit, you can carry it anywhere? And obviously, this can't run afoul of federal, so you couldn't carry it onto a commercial aircraft, but you could go to PDK, for example, unless they specifically prohibit it by federal law. But as long as you've got a firearm, you can get on a bus or you can get on a train with the gun. Is that correct? In Section 2 of this bill, all we're dealing with is updating on cross-references at the urging of Legislative Counsel to be able to clarify that. Of course, when we're talking about boarding an aircraft, we do have individuals that go to private airports and board private aircraft in dealing with that. But to be more technical about the application, I would like to defer to Legislative Counsel on that cross-reference.
while she's looking, I will say that if the concern is aircraft, that we have federal law and TSA has jurisdiction over a public airport, that you are not able to carry a firearm past the security point in an airport, and this does not in any way change that.
Actually, it's a little bit broader than that. It's just going to making sure that I understand. I mean, you would be able to get on the MARTA train with a gun.
That is correct.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, I have only one other question, and then I'm through, if I may. Lines 496 to 497. Why was the forcible misdemeanor or felony language removed?
In looking at, again, this has been a process. When I originally introduced the bill, there were additional crimes that I put in that would prohibit an individual from being able to get a license. And what came out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Special Judiciary Committee, was the philosophy that those crimes that you commit with a firearm should be those crimes that prevent you from getting a license to carry a firearm. As I understand it, that when it comes to what is defined as a forcible misdemeanor, that there is even questions about what that was. So the attempt was to delineate the crimes that would prevent you from getting a license to carry. And so that was the reason we struck the forcible misdemeanor, because of the confusion that does exist about what a forcible misdemeanor really is.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that one. My concern goes more to the felony. For example, somebody convicted of rape or aggravated assault.
If you've been convicted of a felony, you cannot get a license, period.
Except, well, I guess so you can't get it to begin with, so you don't have to worry about whether it's revoked or not.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the indulgence.
In here it listed anybody who is prohibited from being able to have a firearm under U.S. Code 922, which a felony is in there, that you cannot get a license to carry if you've been convicted of any felony.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Good questions. Mr. Mangum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple of questions, Mr. Chairman. Really, I unfortunately was not on the subcommittee, and I did take my time to come into some of the subcommittees, and I do appreciate you giving us somewhat of a summary. You did say that now it is my understanding our concerns about places of worship, you do not have the unfettered right to go into a place of worship with a firearm. Is that correct? And you don't have the right to go on the private universities or public universities, and you just told me that you can go on to MARTA with a firearm, and you just told me that what I would like, I'm not trying to stay here all day because I know the committee stayed hours and I could even stay for all the subcommittee, but if I could just get a succinct, before you could do this, now you could do that. Even when you were writing, you went through the 4 things, and I said, "Wow, that's interesting." 4th of July, what is the test? I was not in the subcommittee to hear that part.
That's a reasonable. Mr. May makes a reasonable request.
And I just want to know what are we're here and we're now here. If I could just know, even what
Senator Seabaugh, I think that goes to, and I apologize for interrupting. I think it just goes to what are the prohibitions as of this minute.
If you'll turn to page 6, what we're saying is that we're removing the confusing language about a public gathering and trying to clearly list where it is you cannot carry a firearm when you are properly licensed. It's very important that we're only talking about individuals who've gone through a background check and qualify to be able to get a license to carry a firearm in public. In Georgia, it is illegal to carry a firearm if you do not have a license. So we're only talking about if you have a license, these are the places you still cannot carry a firearm. It would be in a government building, in a courthouse, in a jail or prison, in a place of worship, period, in a state mental health facility, and on lines 187 and 190, these are already existing law, and we're attempting to get everywhere that you can't carry a firearm in one place. And so we copied those over about on the premises of a nuclear facility and within 150 feet of a polling place. And then if you turn to page 7, this is 1611.127.1, which deals with education, whether it's K through 12 or a university system. And in here, it prohibits you from carrying, even if you're licensed, you cannot carry a firearm on K through 12 school property or on a university or a technical school.
It's just the 1,000 feet. That's the
We're removing the 1,000 feet.
So the effect of that 1,000 feet would be the parking lot is now, you can have your weapon in the parking lot, basically.
In your vehicle. If as I read the committee substitute on lines 258 to 261, that if you are a licensed person and you leave that firearm in a vehicle in a parking lot, then you have not broke the law. And the practical application of that, Representative, is that if you are conducting business and you get a phone call to go pick up your child at a university or to go to university for whatever purpose, that you go, but you have to leave it in your vehicle. You cannot carry it on the campus property.
Transit.
Or if you're in the designated area, that was in reference to the 1,000 feet that you'd be going through.
Right.
The 1,000 foot, but the committee substitute removes the 1,000 foot because I would continue. It's confusing enough to know where the property is. It's even compounded when you're trying to think about where 1,000 feet of the school property would be. Today, at Georgia State, you can go park on a public street, and be within 1,000 feet, and therefore you have unknowingly broke the law.
So that, when you referred to Georgia State earlier, the 1,000 feet now elimination of the 1,000 feet rectifies the problem with Georgia State. If I'm a student at Georgia State and I have my weapon, I can park on the street and I'm okay, or but I cannot go within.
That's correct.
The classroom or on the campus.
That's correct.
You
cannot.
Okay.
You cannot.
And I'm sure I'll have some more questions once you get into the members of the committee. But thank you. I just wanted a general idea. Thank you very kindly.
Mrs. Cooper.
I have a question about that. What about in the sheriff's parking lot and the courthouse parking lots? Is it still?
The committee substitute, as it is right now, would still allow you to leave a firearm in your vehicle if you are a licensed individual. You cannot carry it into the jail or to the house. That's correct. You can't carry it in the building.
The Sheriff's Association didn't take a position on it one way or the other. They did offer they did request that grounds and premises be added to the language, but and that was offered up in subcommittee but was defeated.
Sure.
Okay, is it in here about you can't have it on college campuses and alcohol? What about if there's a sporting event that's this college sporting event, like Georgia State is going to use the dome for games for a couple of years or something like that, and if they were able to sell alcohol, and are you covered about the college being able to not allow guns into the dome?
If you will look at when we talk about on page 6 in the section of 192 through 199 or 2000, when we're talking about
what page is that?
On page 6,
page 6,
lines 192 through 2000 or 200. Excuse me, 192 through 200. This is at the bottom where we say you can't carry, and then we're saying that except for what's listed where you can't carry, then the property owner has a right to decide about whether or not you carry a firearm or don't carry a firearm. And if you'll look on line 196, you're talking about in legal control of property through a lease. So if a university were to go to the World Congress Center to have a shooting environment, they would control that part of the World Congress Center for whatever they want to do about firearms or not to do about firearms. In working with individuals at the World Congress Center, they were perfectly satisfied with this. So whoever that comes in and rents that area, they would dictate who could carry, who could not carry, and also anything about, like you talked about from an alcohol standpoint, about allowing anybody that's been drinking or whatever into that area.
Also, if you look on page 7, as I read this under subparagraph B1, school function is listed in that paragraph.
Yes.
School function. So if you have a Georgia State football game at the dome, that's a school function. Do you understand?
Okay, even though it's not on, actually doesn't say it's on school property. Or
That's correct. It's a school function. Okay.
I understand.
Okay.
Okay, like that. Okay, and domestic violence would be covered because it's a federal law, so you wouldn't be able to carry, you wouldn't be able to get permits. So
That's
it's
correct.
Still covered by it. Okay, thank
Domestic
you.
violence, you can't even have a firearm. You can't even have a gun. You can't even own one.
You can't get a license.
So you would be.
supposed to be in possession of a gun at all.
Yeah, so you definitely be prohibited from having a license.
Okay, I have one more question. Have you always been able to have a gun in your home or in your car without a permit? I mean, I must have missed that somewhere.
As
So,
far as I know, but we changed the law last year about how you have to have a gun in your vehicle to make sure that you didn't break the law.
right, but I mean, like I always thought if I ever wanted a gun, which I haven't wanted a gun, in my home, I would have to go get a permit to get it.
No.
No.
As far back as I can remember, the answer to that is no. It used to be up until we passed, I think it was 89, that if you had it in your car without a license, that it had to be in the glove box, in a console,
I remember that.
or in plain view, whatever
Okay.
that means. But then that's been changed, and today, vis-a-vis this bill, now a person can have one inside their motor vehicle anywhere.
Okay.
I believe that Washington, D.C. attempted something along those lines, and the Supreme Court overturned that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Benfield.
Thank you. My questions are along the same lines as Representative Mangum and Cooper. I just want to make sure I understand where this law allows guns where they are currently not allowed. And my reading is there are 4 areas where guns will now be allowed if you are a licensed permit holder. One is bars, if the owner permits them.
That's correct.
2, school safety zones, and that would include K through 12, colleges and universities, both public and private. The school safety zones.
Within 1,000 feet, that is correct.
The 1,000 feet safety zone. Airports, except where prohibited by federal law.
That's correct.
And parking lots of buildings where guns might otherwise be prohibited. Did I get that? Okay,
yes.
so I see 4 areas. Okay, and I understand your rationale for this is you want clarity, and I do see where there's clarity, especially with the parking lot issue. I understand your reasoning there. My question is with regard to the bars. Current law does not allow guns in bars. That's pretty clear. If you are a licensed permit holder, you cannot bring a gun into a bar. This would allow this says guns are still still banned in bars, but individual owners could permit. How does that allow more clarity? This seems to lead to confusion because now there will be some bars that allow, some bars that don't allow. So if you're a permit holder, you won't know perhaps until you actually get to the bar, if it's a new bar you've never been to before, whether or not they allow it. So this, to me, would be more confusing if you're a permit holder with respect to the bars. If you could address that.
And the first thing that I would say on that it would be the responsibility of the licensed holder to make sure whether or not they had permission to carry. But as the chairman spoke, this has been a process. And when I began this process and looking at how you bring clarity and getting rid of gotcha situations, one fundamental decision that I felt like was very good is that when it comes to private property, that owner makes that choice.
I agree.
And there are many people on both sides of this issue who would like to have control when it comes to their property making that decision. But when you look at who private property owners are, and at that point in time they're churches and bars, some people had a little bit of a problem with that. But I would think that if those believe that private property owners should have the right to make that decision, they have to extend that choice to all private property owners, which would include churches and bars. But this has been a process, and trying to find a way when it came to churches and bars, which are the 2 emotional areas in this, that was what we tried to strike at as finding a compromise position. It's not the clarity that I personally would like to have, but in deference to the process and in respect for those who have issues in those areas, that's the language that we came up with. And we try to be very careful in not weighing too deep into that and telling them how they communicate that permission by they have to post signs, because then you get into it, which you know better than I, this where the sign is posted. This you have to talk about how big the letters have to be and all that kind of stuff. That it'll just have to be the owner of the responsibility of the permit holder to make that to make sure that they have the permission before they carry it there.
May I have just a brief follow-up? And I want to thank you for working with the process, and I really do appreciate especially the places of worship. That was a concern of mine. I do think with regard to the bar, and I agree with you, you've got to respect the private property rights. I think with respect to the bars, though, this change does cause more confusion than clarity. But I am interested in what's the public safety rationale for allowing people who could potentially be drinking to bring guns into bars?
I would say that if when you look at the evidence and the information that exists right now, there are states that do allow license holders to carry firearms into bars, and there's not a significant problem with that. The individuals who go through to get a license, this is very special privilege for them, and believe me, they want to make sure that they retain that right to be able to carry that firearm for the purposes of protection for themselves and their property. And so they are law-abiding citizens. They want to make sure that they obey the law. As a matter of fact, they're the ones that want clarity in this law so they can make sure that they are obeying the law so as not to lose that privilege. And they're not the ones creating random acts of violence that we read about in the newspaper or see on television. These are individuals that believe that they should have a right to be able to carry for defense of themselves and their property, and they're not creating problems out there that I think sometimes we believe that exist that don't. When we changed the law in '89 to allow carry-on MARTA, there were those who talked about how bad things were going to be with that, and we haven't seen that. These are law-abiding citizens, and I believe that it has been demonstrated because in other states that allow carry in bars, there's not the significant issues that we're talking about. I think it's a demonstration that these are law-abiding citizens and can be trusted with that.
Ms. Ramsey. Let me get to some, and I'll come back. Mr. Lunsford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a couple questions on line 526, page 15. I had a little bit of concern where it says on or after January 1st, 2012, weapons carry license shall incorporate the overt and covert security features. And my question is this, and I've spoken with Mr. Travis about this. I have some concerns as this invalidates a license that was not up for renewal yet, so I would like to offer to the committee at the appropriate time that right after 2012 we do new issue or renewal permits so that we don't invalidate every permit in the state on that date. And I had some concerns. I also had some concerns about some of the language in this section, but I think we could address that at a later time. But other than that, Mr. Chairman, that was my only question.
Okay. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I once again want to thank the Senator and the Representative for working with us. We've been through a number of hearings, and I certainly appreciate the changes that have been made related to educational institutions that we talked about in subcommittee. I have two questions, one policy, but one actually of substance dealing with the language and what we're intending to do. On page 14, it goes back to Representative Levitus's question. Lines 490, continuing on then on to the top of the next page where the language is stricken on line 496 and 497. And just tell me if I'm confused about this, but this seems to be the location in the law which allows you to revoke a license. And it appears to me that before we could revoke a license upon conviction of a felony. And if I'm reading this, we're taking that out of saying that if you have a license and if you get convicted of a felony, we've just taken away the ability of the judge to revoke your license for that. I would think we would want to revoke your license if you get convicted of a felony or if you violate the carry provisions that are earlier under now 1611-127, where we said you can carry here and you can't carry there. Am I just reading that incorrectly, or are we doing something inadvertently that we didn't mean to do?
I if that is what it does, it definitely is inadvertently in doing that, because if you're not eligible for a license and you subsequently commit a crime, you should have it revoked.
And I just don't find anywhere else where it says you automatically get it revoked, and this appears to be the way to revoke a license.
I will commit to you that we'll make sure that we clarify, we get that clarified.
Right. So it would appear to me we need to put back in conviction of a felony and violation of 127 and the other items that might cause you to get your license revoked for violating a crime. And then I guess my second question that's somewhat related to that but is more of a policy issue is on page 5 on lines 148 in striking the current public gathering law. Currently we say if you go into an eating establishment, it could be a restaurant, that you shouldn't consume alcohol while you're carrying your firearm, and we've stricken that language. And it goes back to the question about drinking and carrying your firearm, which may be a policy issue that since we're opening this up not only now to carrying in restaurants but to carrying at concerts or other venues where there may be alcohol being consumed, I don't see anything in here that prohibits you from consuming alcohol while you're carrying your weapon, and I assume that was the intent. But I also don't see anything in here that makes it a crime if you become intoxicated while carrying your weapon, or causes you to have your license revoked if you drive a car while intoxicated. Carry a license if you had your
two points that I would make on that. Number one, if you walk into an establishment right now, an eating establishment, you cannot drink in that eating establishment while carrying. But there's many occasions where you could be carrying and still be consuming. That's not against the law, is it right now, where we do not have issues with that happening. But also there is a crime in 1611-134 that if you discharge a firearm while under the influence, that is a crime. So there is a crime for discharging a firearm while under the influence.
This doesn't change that.
This does not change that in any way.
Okay. Would that result in you losing your license to carry your...
Yes, it would.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Ms. Abdul-Salam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, thank you so much for the work that you guys have obviously done on this bill. I'm going to go back to basics just a little bit, and I'm concerned about the provision on page 2, beginning at line 26, adding knife to the definition of a weapon. And who would actually issue a license for you to carry a knife?
Many states have a weapons license, which does allow you to carry a concealed knife for protection. And we have had in the state of Georgia a situation where an individual had a license to carry a firearm, but had a knife and was arrested for a concealed weapon because they had a knife. Now, if we're going to trust an individual with a weapons license to carry a firearm, there are many that believe that they should be okay to carry a knife also. And so in doing this, we are bringing our weapons license to agree with what many other states have in having a weapons license, and make it very clear that you can carry a knife also.
So once you get permitted for the firearm, you're automatically permitted for the knife?
That would be correct.
Okay. And any other manner of weapons that are included in this legislation? You don't have to get a separate... What if I don't carry a firearm, but I want to carry the knife? Would I go through the same process?
Yes, you would.
Okay.
You have to go through a background check to be able to be checked out to make sure that you are qualified to be able to carry a knife.
Okay. All right. But I don't have to have the gun permit?
You will have to have a weapons license to carry that knife.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mrs. Cooper.
I just talked to the chairman, but I do have some concerns that if you're going to let bar people, and I know that we ran into this when I carried the smoking ban, and we decided to let people that restaurant owners and bar owners that did not hire anybody under 18 or serve anybody under 18 to make the decisions for themselves whether they wanted to be smoking or non-smoking. But there were signage requirement that made it perfectly clear to people. And there's no signage requirement in here, so how does the public know? I mean, I don't drink, but if I drank, I think I probably would want to know whether the bar allowed people with guns to go in or not, and I probably would not frequent a bar that allowed people to drink and have guns. I would make the choice to go to another bar. And I don't find anything about signage.
You could inquire of the management whether or not they allowed firearms to be carried on the property or not, and then you can make that decision.
I thought we were supposed to clarify the law and make it easier for people to know what the rules were. And it doesn't seem to me that letting each individual person have to ask and making it their responsibility that clarifies the law. I think it just makes it even. I mean, I'm sort of like Representative Benefield. I would prefer that they not do it at all, but but if they're going to do it, it seems like we have, as legislators, some right to, if you're saying that's what you're supposed to do and clarify the law, not only just for the gun owners, but for the citizens, just that don't carry guns, to know.
If I tried to pass a law, which I would not, but if I tried to pass a law that said that anybody that wanted to could carry a firearm onto your property and make sure that they had that right, that you could do that, and that you would not have the right as a property owner to make that decision, you would not like that at all. You would not.
That's an individual right, but when you.
But the point I'm making is that when I started going down this road and looking at this of how what we do to clarify and to get rid of gotcha situations, I defend your right as a property owner to make that decision. And when we talk about private property rights, well, churches and bars are private property. And so when I started down this and looking at that was a struggle in looking at that. But that's a decision that they should be able to have the right to make because they're a property owner. But working through the process in trying to find a way that we can still be consistent in property owners making that choice of whether or not they would allow people to carry or not to carry, this was the compromise that we came up with. I agree with you that it's not perfect. It's not what I want, and it's apparently not what you want, but it's somewhere in the middle.
I was just about to be able to vote for it, but I really don't. I think I'm fixing to have to tell the chairman, after telling the chairman I could vote for it, that I can't vote for it. I mean, I really do appreciate the fact that you took out the colleges and that you know, and places of worship. But, I mean, if we could do it for smoking, I don't understand. And it's deadly over a longer period of time if you're around smoke and secondhand smoke, but it could be a lot more deadly if you're around somebody that's had too much alcohol as you walk in the bar and have to go find the bar owner and ask them, or somebody who'll tell you which way it is. There could be a flying bullet at that time, and, you know, you wouldn't have a chance. And so I don't just see what it would hurt to have a signage requirement.
I would respectfully say that, again, there are, and I forgot the number, there are many states that allow carry in bars, and you're not having an outcry to outlaw it in bar because of the problems that you're talking about, because they do not exist.
Do they require signage?
That I can't answer. I'm sure some do, and I'm sure some don't.
Thank you.
Ms. Ramsey.
I guess to that point, it's been 2 years now since we removed the prohibition on restaurants.
I believe so.
And we didn't prescribe any signage.
No, we did not.
on private individuals. And if you go to restaurants in Peachtree City where I live, the restaurants, the private property owners that have elected not to have firearms on premises have decided what the signs they're going to put up, what they're going to look like, what the size of the letters are going to be. And to your knowledge, since that has been in effect in restaurants, has there been one problem anywhere with that policy, giving the private property owner the right to set that policy?
I'm not aware of any problem at all.
And from a clarity standpoint, it seems this is a pretty good balance between private property rights and where the end you're seeking to meet, where the licensed carry owner is going to know definitively that the default position of the state is I can't carry a gun into a bar.
That's correct.
And I have to affirmatively seek out the owner of that bar and determine if they have decided on their private property set a policy that says, okay, you can carry it If you're not drinking, you can come in, you can carry it. If you are drinking it, and really the whole host of options that a private property owner would have and retain in setting that policy on their premises, I think that's a pretty good balance that we've struck here, Senator Seabaugh.
I would agree, and any citizen who had the same concern about whether or not they allowed carry would go through the same process that a license holder would to determine whether or not they allowed carry in there or not.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Abrams. Okay. Mr. Levitas, that's pretty audacious, given the breadth and length, but fire away.
Well, fire away, no pun intended.
Yes.
I'll be as quick as I can. I just want to echo really what I think Representative Ramsey was getting at, and maybe what the author is too, that you can decide for yourself if you want to patronize a bar that allows guns, and that's up to you, and that's what the free market's all about. In fact, I think a good argument could have been made for the churches. I understand there was a delicate balance to be made there, and of course, I always said if you guys want them in the churches and the mosques, you can have them. Just leave them out of my synagogues, but that's a different issue. The last question goes back to something you were talking about earlier about the 1,000 feet. I mean, I've never been able to reconcile, and I was a prosecutor, not the brightest or best one, but I never could understand if I happened to live across from a school within 1,000 feet, it seems to me I would have been guilty of a felony for having it. Even if I had it lawfully in my home, I would have still violated the 1,000-foot statute. And so, it's not just parking on the street. You could be in your home, or I could go visit, if he would allow me in his home, Senator Seabaugh, who happened to live across from the school, and I'd have committed a felony under the 1,000-foot restriction.
And that is why with the study committee that we had prosecutors, we had law enforcement officers, and we had judges that came and testified to that fact of why we needed to bring clarification to this law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How was that?
Perfect. Thank you. Ms. Travis, let me ask you, I want to get back to Mr. Thompson's point earlier. I just want to see if we have an issue or not. Okay. Let me ask you to pull the mic if it works, which is a question. Is that the one that
all right, let's talk about old law first. If you turn to page 11, actually starts at the bottom of page 10. Those are the licensing exceptions in current law. And you'll see on number 3 at line 357, a person convicted of a felony, blah, blah, blah. You'll see on line 355, felony, and the word forcible felony or a violation of 1611, 126, 127. All that language has been stricken. Now turn to page 12 at line 403, and we have the new list of who can't have weapon carry licenses issued to them. It picks up some of the same language that was back on page 11, but not all of it. Noticeably absent would be the forcible misdemeanor and the word felony. So that is why on page 14 at line 495 through the top through 497, that language is also stricken. It is to keep consistency with the policy.
Mr. Thompson, is that clear? So what I'm hearing is that there's no material change from where we are right now. Is that correct? In terms of loss of license for conviction of felony and so forth, or am I misunderstanding?
There is a change, and this bill does make a change. Because under old law used to be a felony conviction, and now that exception is gone. It is somewhat gone. It's modified. You have to read lines 403 through 439. Those are all the people that can no longer have licenses. And a little bit more complicated factor would be the cross-reference to the U.S. Code Section 922, 18 U.S.C. 922. So you have to know what is all contained in that in terms of who all can't have licenses.
Senator.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that the representative has brought up something that going through this that does need to be addressed, but because of the way that we have changed who would be prohibited from getting a license, I think it's delicate. Then we'll need to make a reference on the revocation part to reflect that whoever's committed these crimes would also have a license, needs to have a license that should be revoked. Does that make any sense?
Hold on one second. Ms. Travis, I think you're needed in this particular dialogue. Would you repeat yourself, Senator?
I'm sorry.
Yep.
No, that's all
right. What we want to make sure is that if you are prohibited from being issued a license, and we've listed the crimes by which you're no longer eligible, that if you commit any of those crimes, you should also, if you have a license, the license should be revoked.
And if you look at page 14, starting at line 490, this is how we go about revoking. So if at any time during the period that the license is issued, the judge shall learn or have brought to his or her attention in any manner reasonable grounds to believe that the licensee is not eligible to retain the license, the judge, blah, blah, blah. So once the judge is aware that the person is a problem because of lines 403 through 439, those not eligible, then he would have a hearing and it could be revoked.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's addressed.
Mr. Thompson? Do you want Ms. Travis to?
I guess my question, Mr. Chairman, would be if it talks about brought to their attention that they're not eligible to retain the license, but then it says they may revoke it upon an adjudication of, and says what the adjudication has to be. Don't we at least need to say an adjudication that they're no longer eligible to hold the license in accordance with the earlier?
That would probably be.
I think clarify it even better.
Okay.
And we'll take that as a friendly amendment at the appropriate time.
It sounds like there's only 3 or 4 things right now that we've got you can be adjudicated of.
Ms. Abrams.
What he said.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Mr. Mangan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 areas of concern. One,
I think Ms. Abrams has set the bar for questioning, so I just.
Hey, Ms. Abrams can get on a roll.
Yes.
But Chairman Cooper broached the issue that I was concerned with, and my distinguished colleague sitting next to me also mixed it up. 2 years ago, the law was changed. Explain to me the change, and explain to me because if now I understand we are striking the law that says if I go into a restaurant and a person licensed or permitted to carry a license shall not consume alcoholic beverages in a restaurant or eating establishment. That's current law, as I understand it. But now, if I'm going in a restaurant, someone could go in, consume alcohol, carry their gun, get intoxicated, and hopefully we won't get into an altercation. But if we did get into a disagreement and they're intoxicated, I would have no notice. But because it would be pretty clear. I know that any restaurant I go into now, someone could have a gun or a weapon or a firearm, and they can be intoxicated, and they can carry the gun while intoxicated. That is basically what you're saying?
Under current law, you cannot go into a restaurant and consume alcohol while carrying. There is nowhere in the code that prohibits you from consuming alcohol while carrying any other place except for in a restaurant or in a bar currently. But you can carry and consume alcohol, and we've not had issues with individuals consuming alcohol and carrying in the state of Georgia. We've not.
Okay. I somewhat agree with you that we would not have as much because you're not anticipating someone to get really intoxicated in a restaurant. And even if they do, it's not the atmosphere. I don't really. The concern that I had was more to what Ms. Cooper was on, and that is in a bar. In a bar, I anticipate you are going to, and you can become intoxicated, and you can become drunk, and you can get in altercations, and you can get into fights. That happens all the time. And unfortunately in our society, when I was growing up, when I was a kid, we'd fight you and we fight with our hands. Sometimes kid would cheat and get a knife. Now kids are not fighting with hands. They're not fighting with knives. They just pull out a gun and just shoot each other. And I'm just saying, this is a policy decision, and I'm trying to just get your understanding. But if I'm going into a bar and the owner has already said, look, I know these guys are getting drunk over here, but I gave them permission to carry a weapon. If I'm going in as a customer, should I not be informed that there is a carry law here? Just to, some kind of notice to a customer that you can carry in a bar. I don't have a problem if you carry it. But let me as a customer know, or my friends.
Let's let the senator answer.
Can you?
Again, in going down that road, there are numerous issues when it comes to smoking bans or other bans in places when it comes to signage and notification. There are attorneys that can comment on that much better than I can of how they've litigated where the sign is placed, whether a bush grew up around the sign, what the size of the letters should be, and we've tried to not wade into and create those problems in this law that we're trying to for clarification. Again, we're talking about probables, and what I'm saying is that there's an enormous amount of evidence out there in the United States of places where people that are properly licensed that are carrying into bars, and they're not creating issues. A license to carry a firearm is not a license to commit a crime. And if you commit a crime, you will be punished for that. And if you commit a crime with a firearm, you will lose the privilege to be able to carry. And those people that are licensed do not want to lose that privilege. And they're not going to be the ones creating those random acts of violence that you talk about. Most of those individuals, almost all those individuals, are ones who do not have license. They're not law-abiding citizens to begin with, and are probably carrying into bars right now anyway.
Okay.
Illegally.
The DRAM, you're familiar with the DRAM shop litigation. I did see, and I think Mr. Levitas brought up the exclusion of civil liability. If, in fact, I do, and I just want to know whether it is your intent to exclude civil liability. If I do, as a bar owner, give permission to have a weapon there, and someone does negligently, take the gun out and just shoot me, is it your intent to take away my right of cause of action against not only the owner, and the person there?
This does not do that.
Okay.
Ms. Benfield.
Final question.
Mr. Mangum, I've got to, I've got to keep the wheels on the track here. You've gone on a long time. I've got to give Ms. Benfield the last word here.
Can I just have one?
Please make it quick.
Let me quick. Section 2.8. Is it your intent that if a person is going on with the intent to go hijack a plane, a bus, or as long as they have a license to carry the gun that they're going to hijack with, that they can in fact hijack the plane, bus, or other facility?
Hijacking is a crime. You can't do that.
No, I'm asking you, is it your intent here?
No, not at all. Not at all. Like we said, this is just, we put this in a section of just from cross references and clarifying law. This does not have any policy changes whatsoever. Currently, on aircraft in a public airport, TSA has security measures from the checkpoint all the way to the aircraft. This in no way allows an individual to sidestep any of those regulations or any of those laws. It does not give them permission at all to do that.
Okay. All right. Privately or publicly? If I'm a private aircraft, if I'm a public aircraft, if I'm a private bus owner, you have the right to come on my bus with a gun?
If you have a license to carry a firearm. If you do not have a license, then you do not. And if someone wants to commit a crime on a bus, I will guarantee you that 99.9999999% of the time that individual does not have a license to carry a firearm.
Ms. Benfield has the floor. Mr. Mangum, there comes a limitation. Ms. Benfield.
Thank you. I just have one remaining concern I wanted addressed, and I do appreciate your willingness to work with us through the process, and that's Found that my concerns on page 8 and 9, the subsections F and G regarding the school safety zones, and I have really a two-part question. One is the area found on line 275 and also line 290. If you could just define what an area is, because that's confusing to me. And then my other part of that question, and I agree with your goal of making the law clearer with regard to where license permit holders may carry their weapons, and I agree with you on that goal. I want the law to be clearer. I have concerns about this being less clear as far as what an area is. And my second part of that concern is with regard to the signage required by schools. I know many schools, my son's school in particular, when you're within the 1,000 feet zone, there's a sign and it says weapons-free and drug-free school zone. And I just checked the code at section 16-13-32.4 with regard to the drug-free school zones. That is still 1,000 feet for the drug-free zone. So the way I read this is schools would have to change their current signage, because right now they just use one sign, or many schools do. The way I read this, they'd have to have 1,000 feet for the drug zone, and then I'm not sure what the area is for the gun zone, so they'd have to have two signs. And then there's the confusion about you got the 1,000 feet for the drug-free zone, but not 1,000 feet for the weapons-free zone. Do they have two sets of signs? Does this cause more confusion? If you could address that, please.
Your first question on 275, listening to the area legislative council is directing me that the area is defined as the school safety zone, which is in lines 216 through 220. That is the area.
216?
216 through 220.
I don't see. This may be more appropriate for legislative council. It says on line 215 is used in this code section, and then it has school safety zone. Does that impact the school safety zone for the drug-free zone, which is also found in Title 16? It's a different code section, so it shouldn't. But do you understand my question about the confusion with the signage? Because now there's going to be one zone for drugs and then a different zone area for schools.
I was going to say, I don't think there's anything in this bill that prohibits them from leaving their signs up. It's just now it's not going to be a crime if somebody has a gun within 1,000 feet of a school.
Right.
But they can keep their signs up. I mean, there's nothing that says they have to take their signs down. They can leave them where they are. It's just now if somebody has a gun within 1,000 feet of the property, it's just not a crime to have it anymore.
So you're saying they can keep up their signs up that say drug-free and weapon-free zone starting at the 1,000 feet?
Sure, why not?
But they could bring guns within the 1,000 feet if this were to pass.
That's correct.
That's right.
So the signs would be wrong.
Well, I mean, they would be wrong, but
it's a statement, but it wouldn't be. I mean, the sign probably doesn't say it's a crime not to carry a gun in here.
I'd have to look at the sign again, but it's confusing.
What is the pleasure of the committee, Mr. Setzler?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to pass SB 308, committee substitute.
Mr. Setzler makes motion of due pass of Senate Bill 308 by substitute LC 294418S, second by Mr. Hatfield. Are there any amendments, Mr. Thompson? Should I just defer it over to Ms. Travis, or have you got your...
Mr. Chairman, I think Ms. Travis has an amendment on that would be on line... I'm trying to see which line now. I think we put it in on 493. 494. All right. And she's drafted some language, Mr. Chairman. I think if she could read, that would be an appropriate amendment.
Ms. Travis, if you could pull the mic so we can hear you.
line 494 after the word upon. So it would read revoke the license of the person upon a finding that such person is not eligible for a weapons carry license pursuant to subsection B of this code section or an adjudication. The rest of it would remain the same.
Okay. Let me ask you to read it one more time for members of the committee.
This is just the inserted language. A finding that such person is not eligible for a weapons carry license pursuant to subsection B of this code section or an...
Is there any objection to the Thompson amendment? Any objection? With that objection, the amendment is adopted. Any further amendments? Mr. Levitas, you're recognized for your... I think every member of the committee should have Mr. Levitas' amendment of inserting on line 111. Does anybody not have the amendment? Okay. Mr. Levitas.
Mr. Chairman, my first of the two amendments is to insert on line 111 after the word offense language that essentially mirrors what we do in other offenses, DUI and some others. And instead of putting somebody in a position where if they committed a misdemeanor offense and then 20 years later committed the same offense, they would be actually liable for a felony. This just says that they have to commit the two offenses within a 5-year period of time. Otherwise, after the 5th year, it would become a misdemeanor again.
Is there any objection to the Levitas amendment? There is objection. All in favor of the Levitas amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have, and the amendment is adopted. Coming around the table.
I do have another amendment. Do you want me to come back to it?
Let me recognize Mr. Lunsford for his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 15, line 526, I think Ms. Travis has the language we worked at earlier. After the date of 2012, I think we're going to use new issue or renewal weapons carry license. Newly issued. That is correct. So that we don't invalidate a license that someone just had renewed just prior to that, and all of a sudden they become guilty while they're waiting on their new license.
Or renewal.
Chairman Lunsford, let me ask you to repeat your amendment.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. On page 15, line 526, after January 1st, 2012, we would place between 2012 after the comma and before the word weapons, newly issued or renewal, so that consequently that every license doesn't expire at midnight the night before, and they all have to be renewed that day.
Is there...
The government is actually closed on that day anyway.
Is there any objection to the Lunsford amendment? Is there any objection to the Lunsford amendment? Hearing none, the amendment is adopted. Mr. Chatfield.
Mr. Chairman, I would move the previous question.
Mr. Chairman moves the previous question. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? There is objection. Gentleman move. Gentleman moves. All in favor of moving the previous question, please signify by raising your right hand. Opposed? The motion fails. Any further amendments? Ms. Cooper. Mrs. Cooper.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm getting closer on this and trying to come to terms with your thing on the bars and no signage. But I know that our sheriff's departments and our judges had some real concerns about the property, and they mailed that to several people on the committee. So I'd like to make the following amendment because of that concerns, and it's just like the judges say, that after a verdict and when it goes against people, that one of the most explosive places that you have is in the parking grounds as the parties leave of the area. So I have real trouble. So on line 178, I would have number 3, 178, 3. That what you've got it, and it would read after in a jail or prison, No?
No, just read number one.
Just number 3. In or on the real property of any courthouse, jail, or prison. I was doing what? No.
Well, if you're going to do courthouse, you have to do line 177.
Okay, so I have to do 177, and it has to read in a courthouse or in or on the real property of any courthouse. So that would be on line 177. It would read in a courthouse in or on the real property of any courthouse, and then line 178 would read in a jail or prison or in or on the real property of any courthouse, jail, or prison. And then we would have to remove on lines 170, you would have to remove courthouse, jail, or prison. On 171, you would have to remove courthouse, jail, or prison. And on line 172, you would have to remove the words courthouse, jail, or prison.
Senator Seabaugh, your reaction?
Mr. Chairman, I would respectfully oppose the amendment. In trying to bring clarification again, where it is that these areas would be in confusion, and also, as you made a comment in your opening comments, we have a very delicate balance that we've tried to strike in this legislation to begin with, and I believe that strikes at the heart of the balance that we've struck.
I would agree, and normally I would not. Normally, I would not comment on a situation, an amendment like this, even one as perceptually technical as this one seems. That being said, and really this goes to supporters of Second Amendment rights here on the committee. What we do have here, and I think Senator Seabaugh put it very well, is that we do have a very delicate work product. We have a delicate work product that, if it is changed in any substantial way, and substantial, of course, is an eye of the beholder determination, that could actually have the effect of preventing it from getting to the next level in consideration by the full House, which is something that I don't think anyone wants to occur, of course, amongst those of us who support the bill in general. So I would agree with you that I think this type of amendment needs to be opposed, and I appreciate your perspective, and I want committee members to understand why I have that perspective as well on this particular amendment, and perhaps others as well as we go down the line. Is there objection to the amendment by Mrs. Cooper? There is objection. All in favor of the Cooper amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Opposed? And the amendment fails. Are there any further amendments? Ms. Benfield.
Thank you. Let's see, where am I? Oh, page 6, lines 185 to 186, to delete those two lines. Delete subsection 6 and renumber accordingly. That's with regard to allowing licensed permit holders to bring guns, concealed guns, into bars. If the goal is to have clarity in the law, my amendment would make it clear you simply cannot bring concealed weapons into a bar. And my opinion is this causes more confusion, because now the permit holder is in a position of having to actually violate the law by going into a bar and inquiring whether or not a gun is allowed in that establishment, because there is no signage requirement. I understand why there's no signage requirement, but my opinion is this is more confusion than clarity. So I would move to strike those two lines.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Benfield, let me, and I'm going to ask the author if he agrees with me or not on this, because I want to make sure that you have clarity on, if we go ahead and strike that, then the effect of that will be to allow those in bars, period, as opposed to a prohibition in a bar,
yeah,
unless the owner of the bar permits the carrying of a weapon or long guns by license holders. And I'm actually going to,
You're correct.
and while philosophically,
No, you're
perhaps
correct
there are
on
some
that.
of
I'm
us
sorry.
who would actually be in favor of that, I need to be even-handed in saying
No,
that
you're
we have
correct
a
in that.
very delicate work product.
I agree.
So can I count
I'll
on the lady to
withdraw my
withdraw her
motion.
amendment? Thank you.
I'll withdraw my.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Mangum.
Two amendments. I'll go ahead and deal with that section first, which is a philosophical. I think I've already been told by the author that we don't need to give notice to customers, but I will go ahead and offer that amendment, and that is on line 186, in a bar unless the owner of the bar permits the carrying of the weapon or long guns by license holders, provided reasonable notice is provided to customers and the public, period.
Offer a friendly amendment here.
A friendly amendment is welcome.
I would actually say such permission shall be prominently posted, so that it's not it simply provides notice to anyone. And I would point out as a part of that, we have signage requirements. I just looked it up. We have at least 27 signage requirements, including signage regarding llama activity. And so I think it is not an untenable thing to suggest, just if you have llama activity, you have to provide prominent notice of that. And
Let's have order. Let's have order.
And with all due respect to the authors, I think that private property rights, when commerce is involved, requires a heightened level of responsibility, and so I don't see how it undermines the effectiveness of this language to require posting of signage, because I think it does solve the problem for a person who is carrying a gun to know that they are allowed to have to bring that in, but it also provides notice to any other patron that that is a facility that permits that activity. And so I would say that this is not something that unsettles the delicate balance that's been achieved by this.
Let me ask the author, give the courtesy of the author for his opinion, and then I know there were questions regarding the proposed amendment and the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The one thing in going through this process and working on this for 2 years that I heard from, especially when you have areas where you can't carry, in restaurants and other places, I heard loud and clear from the owners of those establishments, do not require us to have to post anything, because with posting in here, whether you allow firearms, you don't allow firearms, if we're requiring them to post that they're saying you cannot have firearms, that is advertisement that there is not any firearms in that establishment, and could be considered as open game for anybody that does want to create any kind of problem. So the business owners would really object to have to do any kind of signage, because they would not want to have to advertise that this is a gun-free zone, for very concerns that y'all raised of what might happen in saying, hey, we're saying there's nobody getting guns here. I mean, it's similar to the sign many of y'all saw about the guy that posted the sign in his front yard and says, I'm not going to use my guns to defend my neighbor who doesn't want to have guns. So I mean, I would really think that it'd be very difficult for us to go down that road of prescribing and have to do the signage, because of the business establishment. A lot of those people would not want to do that for the very reason that they feel like they would be advertising to people that we do not have any guns here.
Mr. Levitas, you had a question.
Yeah, a question, I guess, for the author in respect to the amendment. I mean, wouldn't the natural assumption be for anybody that I should assume that any place is allowed to carry a gun? You go back to the free market. If I choose not to patronize your place, that's up to you. And if I want to post it, I still could.
That's correct.
If I wanted to.
That's correct.
And if I don't see a sign, I have the right to go, instead of to Applebee's, go to Representative Peake's Cheddar's and eat there instead.
That's correct.
And so I guess my further question to you is, if somebody is concerned about that, they can certainly call the establishment ahead of time and say, do you allow guns on your premises?
Absolutely. I tried to make that point earlier, that the responsibility is on the license holder to see whether or not they can carry or they can't carry.
And similarly,
similarly for the person that is concerned about whether or not an establishment allows firearms or not, that they would be on the same equal standing.
All right, let's go ahead and have a vote on the amendment. Let me ask Mr. Mangum and Ms. Abrams if they would restate their joint amendment, I'll call it.
Adding at the end of the sentence, provided prominent, use your language. I like your language. Instead of reasonable notice, prominent notice.
I would amend so that after the semicolon, and such permission shall be prominently posted, semicolon.
And if you could repeat it one more time.
In a bar, comma, unless the owner of the bar permits the carrying of weapons or long guns by license holder, and such permission shall be prominently posted, semicolon.
Is there objection to the Abrams amendment? There is objection. All in favor of the Abrams amendment, please signify by raising your hand.
Should raise your hand, dear.
Opposed? And the amendment fails.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there any further amendments, Ms. Abrams?
Thank you.
One other.
Oh, I'm sorry.
On section 2.8, lines 824, I am reading this, and I didn't get the question out, Mr. Chairman. I just want to remind you of that, and I want to just, the way I read it, and if it does read the way I read it, and I understand it, then if it reads some other way, maybe I don't need to make this amendment, but if it reads the way I read it, and that is saying that relating to bus or rail, or rail vehicle hijacking and boarding with concealed weapons as follows. Subparagraph B delineates any person who boards or attempts to board an aircraft, bus, or rail vehicle, and it does not make a distinction between whether or not it's private or public, with any explosive, destructive device, or hoax device, or such term as defined in OCGA 16780. And then it says firearm. And right now I understand that this would be excluded, but this would allow it if for which such person does not have on his or her person a valid weapon carry license issued pursuant to 1611-129, unless possessing such firearm is prohibited by federal law. So whether it's my understanding, well, I would like to, unless it's a different understanding, I'd like to strike lines 824 through 826 and renumber accordingly after the word firearm and before the semicolon, if that means, and the author of the bill can clarify it, if that means that, for example, I have a private bus line or I have a private aircraft and I say no guns allowed, and you are permitted to override my private right to not allow you to have a gun or firearm on my aircraft, bus, or rail vehicle, or even if MARTA says I don't want a firearm on MARTA, and you say, this basically says that whether or not I, as a private property owner, or a public property owner for that purpose, if I say that I don't want a firearm on there that you may hijack aboard with a concealed weapon, it says that that would not, are you basically saying I have not the right to prohibit you from having a firearm to board my aircraft, bus, or rail vehicle?
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
As a private property owner, you have every right to make the decision whether or not an individual can carry a firearm onto your aircraft, your bus system, your vehicle, whatever. You have that right to do that. So, to answer your question, the issue as when it comes to public transportation with MARTA, that issue was settled with House Bill 89. It's already legal for those who are properly licensed to carry on public transportation, unless there is a federal law that prohibits it.
Why do we need this language then?
Legislative Council, I thought, tried to address that. This just
I did not hear that.
Okay, this was in the cross-reference sections to make sure that we bring every reference to the carry law in Georgia in updating these sections, and really has no policy changes. But I'll again allow her to explain that.
Thank you.
I actually think this is necessary to deal with these aircraft, bus, or rail vehicle are defined terms for this part of the code, and this is not merely, I don't see this as merely a cross-reference. I see this as if you're allowing persons that have weapons permits to be in these locations. The definition of rail means any railroad or rail transit car, carriage coach, or other vehicle, whether self-propelled or not, designed to operate on a rail or rails or other fixed right-of-way by a transportation company for the purpose of carrying passengers or freight or both for hire. transportation company is defined by any person, group of persons, or corporation providing for hire transportation to passengers or freight by aircraft, by bus, upon the highways of the state, etc. I frankly do not know how the former bill fixed the law in this regard, in terms of license holders being able to carry. There may be another code section of which I am not aware. But this fix on line 824 to 826 is so that a weapon permit holder can carry unless it's prohibited by federal law. That's how I'm reading it.
All right. Mr. Mangum, do you have an amendment to offer?
That the proposed language be stricken and renumbered accordingly in order that we would not allow someone who is legally licensed to go onto a aircraft, bus, or rail vehicle.
Could I direct you
and
to line?
hijack?
Could I arrange? Well, first of all, hijacking would be a crime, but
I know it's a. But
look at line 839, 840, and 41, where it says the provisions of this subsection shall not apply to any privately owned aircraft, bus, or rail vehicle if the owner of such aircraft vehicle has given their express permission to board.
Mr. Mangum, would you like to pursue your amendment?
I really am. I'm not trying to destroy this bill. I'm just trying to get clarification.
And I'm trying to keep things moving. So I'm going to ask you one last time. Do you want to offer an amendment now or not?
The provision that you just pointed out to me says that I have to give express permission. It does not apply if I give express permission. I don't care if someone gives express permission. My thing is I don't want to have to. I do want to proceed because I believe that this puts the onus on someone coming from Augusta to the airport, for example, who has a bus for hire.
Mr. Mangum, we know what your point is. I know what your amendment is.
I'm just trying to make sure that
Mr. Mangum, I'm going to rule you out of order in 2 seconds. I've given you a very wide berth here. So we're going to consider your amendment unless you withdraw it right now. You tell me what it is you want to do.
I apologize to the chair.
Please don't. It's not necessary. It's not necessary. I simply want you to.
I do want to propose the amendment.
Mr. Mangum offers the amendment of striking the new language on 824 to 826 and renumbering accordingly. Is there objection to the amendment? There is objection. All in favor of the Mangum amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Opposed? And the amendment fails. Are any further amendments? Ms. Abrams.
Thank you. I have two amendments. The first is on page 7, lines 209 and 210. To strike them there in their entirety. This permits the carry of weapons in airports, and I don't believe that's safe at any point.
Could you repeat your amendment, please?
I would move to strike lines 209 and 210 on page 7.
Ms. Abrams moves to amend the substitute by striking lines 209 and 210 and renumbering accordingly. Is there objection to the amendment? There is objection. All in favor of the Abrams amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Opposed?
And I have a second amendment.
Yes, ma'am. And the amendment fails. Ms. Abrams.
And I know we're trying to move, but I do want to thank Senator Seabaugh for his responsiveness. This is the nicest gun bill we've had to do.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Ms. Abrams, you do realize this is recorded.
I know.
Can I quote?
I even have constituents in the audience.
Can I use that quote?
You may. It is the nicest gun bill. And I do applaud the clarification and the resolution of absurdities in the law, and I appreciate the maintenance of restrictions on churches and schools. But in reference to a lot of the I guess for lack of a better term, obiter dicta that's come out today about why we need this, I think it's important to put on the record why there are those of us who believe in the Second Amendment have some concerns about this bill. And that lies in the fact that even the Heller decision acknowledges that the reasonable restrictions on constitutional rights are permissible when you have to protect public safety, and there are sensitive areas that are entitled to that protection. And that Supreme Court decision specifically references schools and government buildings. And in both of my amendments, I've attempted to maintain that. And I think it's equally important that we recognize that constitutional rights are not absolute. We have constitutional rights to indicate what our individual freedoms are, but we have government because we recognize those individual freedoms have to be balanced against the needs of others in society. And so this notion that there's some unlawful incursion onto the rights of Second Amendment, onto the Second Amendment, I think ignores the reality that we, by the very nature of this body, regulate the exercise of rights at all times. We regulate the exercise of religion, the exercise of free speech, and so I do think it's important for the record for us to acknowledge that the Second Amendment is not under attack. We're simply trying to clarify the regulatory scheme by which we operate, and I think that's a valid and important aspect of this body, including those of us who support the Second Amendment but tend not to exercise all of our rights thereunder. That said, my additional amendment would be to line 216 to strike or and restore the language within 1,000 feet of any real property. To do the same on line 273, and those would be the only two places. I share and actually support the concerns about the 1,000-foot barrier for colleges and universities. Those are ambiguous spaces, and particularly in downtown Atlanta, it's hard to tell what Georgia State doesn't own. So I'm perfectly comfortable with that restriction. But I do think that there's heightened responsibility when it comes to schools for K through 12. And I believe we've solved many of the problems with Representative Horn's amendment on lines 261 and 262 regarding transit. And so I would ask that this body restore the 1,000-foot zone for K through 12.
Ms. Abrams moves within Section 1-4 to restore the 1,000-foot barrier buffer in the appropriate sections and to renumber accordingly. Is there objection to the amendment? Object. There is objection. All in favor of the Abrams amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Opposed? Okay. And the amendment fails. Are there any further amendments, Ms. Benfield?
Correct the amendment I tried to make earlier, and that is on page 6, line 185. I think to achieve what I wanted to achieve, which would be to ban concealed weapons by licensed permit holders in bars, what I would need to say is on line 6, in a bar, semicolon, and then delete the remainder of that subsection.
Would the lady just please repeat her proposed amendment for members?
And if Legislative Council could confirm that would achieve my goal. On line 185, page 6, subsection 6, in a bar, semicolon, and then delete the remainder of that subsection. So delete, unless the owner of the bar permits the carrying of a weapons or long guns by license holders. And I've already explained my rationale. I know we need to move forward.
That's all right. I appreciate it. Is there objection to the Benfield amendment? There is objection. All in favor of the Benfield amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Opposed? And the amendment fails. Are there any further amendments? Mr. Levitas.
No, Mr. Chairman, I don't have.
Sorry.
But if there's going to be a time, I have about one sentence comment before we actually take the vote.
Fire away.
I'm going to vote in favor of this. I'm going to vote in favor of this bill, but I will tell to get it out of committee. But I will tell the author that I'm unlikely to vote for it on the floor if the provision allowing folks to carry guns on MARTA trains and buses is kept in there. Unlike every other provision we've discussed, there are folks who have no choice in some cases except to get around by virtue of getting on a MARTA. They don't have the choice of not going to a different restaurant or something like that. So I think there's a lot in this bill that is fantastic. That's the one provision that might make me keep from voting on this. And so either now or at a conference committee, I would just ask the author to consider removing that one particular provision.
Thank you for the comment, Mr. Setzler. Are there any further amendments? Seeing none, Mr. Chairman, did you have a quick comment?
I was just going to say that those very same people who have no choice but to use MARTA to get where they're going don't have the opportunity to have a firearm in a car. And if they want to be secure, if they believe carrying a firearm is part and parcel to being secure in their persons and effects and protecting themselves, then access to carry a firearm in MARTA correspondingly would be necessary. So I would encourage your support.
Are there any further amendments, Mrs. Cooper?
since we're making comments, I'll very briefly say that Ms. Abrams said it much more eloquently than I could ever say, that we believe in that I believe in Second Amendment rights, but I also believe that government has a role. It's a fine balance of protecting the citizens and also protecting public property rights. Senator Seabaugh, thank you for what you did allow to be changed in this bill. I do appreciate that, but I think I've expressed my concerns, and especially for my sheriffs and judges that have asked me specifically to do that. I feel like I can't vote for the bill.
I see no further amendments. I see no further discussion. All in favor of the motion by Representative Setzler of due pass Senate Bill 308 LC 294418S by substitute. All in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Opposed? And the motion is adopted. Thank you, Senator Seabaugh.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much, and thank you to the members of the committee for what I think is a great demonstration of how the process can work. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take 3 minutes and continue with Senate Bill 42. Let's call up Senate Bill 42. Let me ask a representative from the ACCG. Jim, you're closest. Or whoever. It's fine. A representative of the ACCG to come forward. Let me ask a representative of the State Bar, if they're here, to come forward. And just grab a seat up front. Let me ask, Lee, you want to come up for the CPDs? That would be great. And I want to have a roadmap conversation more than anything else. If you could let us know who you are, just for the tape and for the membership, we'd sure appreciate it.
My name is Mike Berg. I am chairman of the Dawson County Board of Commissioners. In my capacity today, I am the chair of the Georgia Public Defender Standards Council as of 6 months ago, and I'm also on the executive committee of the Association of County Commissioners, so I actually represent two entities.
Sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Henry Walker. I'm the chair of the State Bar's Indigent Defense Committee.
Great. Lee, if you could.
I'm Lee Robinson. I'm the legislative chair of the Georgia Association of Circuit Public Defenders and the Circuit Public Defender for the Macon Judicial Service.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for your patience. And I think your patience will pay off, and you'll see what I mean in just a moment. It's become very clear to the leadership of the House, and this is as per a conversation that I've had that I'm going to be very candid with you about, that I've had with Speaker Ralston very recently about the issue of conflict cases. There are two issues there. One has to do, of course, with raw dollars, and the other has to do with accountability. It is our contention that right now we have a system as it relates to conflict cases where there is not the accountability that there needs to be, that there are not the standards that there need to be. It is our contention at this point, and we're not looking for a debate at this point, that we have certain circuits, and maybe even certain individuals within those circuits throughout the state, who are not being good stewards of resources, of taxpayer resources, when it comes to conflict cases. And that is a big driver of our costs. Combine that with a recessionary economy, and you have a problem. We have a problem. To date, we have not received anything concrete from either the council, really from anyone, about here is a fix. And it's something that we began to work on after the set, or we thought we were working on together, that we thought we would receive something on during the interim last year, after we made the decision to hold Senate Bill 42, in the hope that we would get some sort of guidance either from the council or from whomever. As a practical matter, that did not occur, causing frustration levels to rise, as you might expect. while the House leadership, including myself, including the Speaker, understand that a draconian measure wouldn't help anyone, we did have a reasonable expectation that there would be something coming forward that would help the problem on conflicts. That did not occur. And so we decided to start working on a work product ourselves, since we really didn't have any concrete feedback from anybody about what to do on it ourselves. Because without some sort of feedback, in order to go ahead and promote and arrive at consensus, well, you have to do the job yourself. The substitute that was published and that you have is a potential framework for that. It's a compilation of ideas that we have on our side of this issue, some of which I know the relevant players who are right here agree with, and some of which I presume you don't. We understand that. We have heard in the interim, late, that parties here would like the opportunity to get together and achieve consensus on the issue themselves, meaning the CPDs, the Public Defender Standards Council / ACCG, and the State Bar, to work out a solution. That's what I thought we were going to get last year. We did not. And I'm not sitting here shooting arrows at anyone or anything. But I will tell you this, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and on behalf of Speaker Ralston. By virtue of doing that, what we will end up doing, in effect, is having those people who are in the process of suing the state, and in our opinion, attempting to bring the indigent defense system, indigent defense council system that we have right now, to its knees. All we will achieve, candidly, between now and December 31st, from our perspective, is giving them the opportunity, which they will seize sooner rather than later, to march into some court and say, look, the state's doing nothing. My personal sense of it, and I want to make sure this is clear, is my personal sense that those individuals really have no interest whatsoever in a good, thriving, responsible, accountable, fiscally responsible system as it relates to conflicts and perhaps other areas as well, but are more concerned with bringing the system to its knees and perhaps attorney's fees, perhaps not. If you were sitting in our chair, there'd be no other alternative. There'd be nothing else to consider, because that's what we're looking at. We've been asked by the CPDs, by the council, by ACCG, and by the State Bar to hold off. And we're inclined to do that. But I just want to make sure it's clear that while we do that in the interim between now and December 31st, all we're going to get from those people who seek to go ahead and bring the system to its knees for the purposes of attorney's fees and their day in the sun getting, whatever amount of ink they can get as they pound their chests in self-righteous indignation against the big bad state, in which our budget has gone down, $4 billion or so over the course of 2 fiscal years. That's what we're going to get for our flexibility, just so it's clear. I'm not comfortable with that. Speaker Ralston is not comfortable with that. But in deference to the organizations that you represent, whom we believe truly want to get to a solution, we're going to do that. And we're going to get those slings and arrows. We're going to get that criticism. We're going to get those people in the newspapers, who have no interest in solutions but have every interest in self-aggrandizement and other self-possessed interests. That's okay. To us, those individuals, and I hope to you too, are not relevant to the conversation. We're interested in dealing with people and in working with people who are truly interested in a solution. I've had conversations with all of you. Mr. Walker, I've not had a conversation with you. The Speaker is very clear, and I'm very clear. We are of one mind on this. We're going to give this one last chance. Our hope and prayer is that between now and December 31st, interested parties, leaders, because that's what you are leaders on this issue, because we're looking to you to lead on this, in cooperation, in collaboration, to come up with a system and come up with a protocol, a system of management that makes sense. so that we can go ahead and get our arms around, in some cases, runaway costs, while still meeting our constitutional obligations, which I understand is a Goliath task. We get that. The Speaker understands that. I understand it. Members of this committee from both sides of the aisle understand that. But what we do know is that we can't keep on the current path. There's just not that. It's just unsustainable. That's the bottom line. So this is not by way of finger pointing. This is not by way of having, of commencing an adversarial relationship. Just the opposite. Just the opposite, and it's by the request of leaders here. But the Speaker also was very clear to me, and I agreed, that if we cannot get a good, responsible framework for change on this thing, on this issue, by December 31st, then we're not going to have any choice but then to go ahead and go it alone, which we don't think really, in the overall, helps anyone. The best solution on this issue is a consensus solution. It's a collaborative solution, and it's a solution that will go ahead and be sustainable, not just now, and not in the sense of the personalities and the people in the various roles now, but really a generation from now. Because what we do here that's really important beyond the budget is the precedent that we set for a generation from now and how the system is working then. So with that, the Speaker was very insistent with me that I make sure that I get a commitment, candidly, from you, out loud, here, that you're fundamentally committed to working toward that solution in a collaborative manner and investing people in the process who are interested in the same solution. Not those who are interested in bringing the system to its knees, not those who are more interested in newspaper coverage, but those who are really interested in doing the hard work, the scut work of making this issue not go away but be solved. Mr. Robinson, are you able to help us with that?
Well, Mr. Chairman, as you know, we took a giant step forward, the Circuit Public Defenders did, starting several months ago in trying to craft a solution to this, and we've moved way down the road now, so we're not really starting at point A. We've still got a long ways to go, but at least we've got an idea out there for us to work, and so I'm looking forward to helping craft a solution to this. And
Thank you.
Collaboration has been good.
Thank you. Mr. Berg, I don't know how you do what you do. You're a county commission chair, and you're on the Public Defender Standards Council, and somehow you've been able to manage to you still have hair on your head. I don't know how that's possible. So I've said this to you before. I appreciate the burden that you have and the various hats that you wear. But the Speaker and also myself, and I believe the bipartisan members of this committee, need you and your counterparts and the people, your peers on the council, who really are interested in solutions. Our sense of it, candidly, is that there are people on the council who are very interested in productive solutions. We are also under the impression, just based upon what we've read in the newspaper, that there are some who perhaps are not so much. And those are the same people who tend to talk at people as opposed to them. And that's not how we get to solutions. I know you agree with that. You're that guy. You're not that guy. And there are other people on the council who are not as well. I need to ask you: Are you and other like-minded members of the council committed to that solution as well and that process?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I can more readily appreciate what you all do by sitting here for the last 5 hours and listening to the different aspects of what's going on. But as Lee just mentioned, I think we're further along than we've ever been before. I've been chair 6 months now, and I will admit to you that the sense of urgency compiles itself as the days go by. And until about I'd say about 3 weeks ago, when we could bring everybody together through the auspices, I might add, of ACCG being the facilitator for the meetings, I was concerned that we would not have everybody in the room we needed to bring us forward. I know the council is interested in moving forward. They serve on that council with a passion, I think, and sometimes that passion gets the best of them. And I think we've done a lot in the last 6 months to change some of that, but we've still got some way to go. But I take full responsibility for getting us to a point where you don't have to see us next year, and your committee doesn't have to see us, that we've got a program that works, that we've got a system that works, that we're serving the needs of Georgians, and that we're doing that within the confines of the budget that you have. Certainly, we don't control what goes into the system when it starts, but we can manage what we do get. And I think that's what Lee, I think that's what the bar and others have all pledged to do. So you've got our commitment that we're going to see that through.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, let me, as far as the bar goes, I know we have this bar opinion that is pending, in the pending draft that's in the pending process right now, and that's a pretty extended process time-wise, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. It is critically important, obviously, that there be collaboration between the bar and leaders here to make sure that this works. Because if one of the legs on that stool doesn't hold, then the stool goes down. And what I'm most concerned about, in all candor, is that in the zeal is the zeal of some in the bar to do whatever they want to do, regardless of what other external factors like budget concerns exist. That's irresponsible as far as we're concerned. My hope is that the bar will look at it. I tend to think, I have to think that you look at it, although we have not had a conversation about it, but I'm going to make the presumption that you look at it with all those factors in mind. My sense of it is that there are some in the bar, frankly, who don't. My only hope, my only ask on this is that the people who are in the bar, which I have a great respect for, the leadership now and the leadership coming up, in the context of the opinion that's out there, the draft, what it means, what it doesn't mean, to go ahead and take a very whole approach to how that opinion will affect the operations, the decisions, the recommendations, and the work, the boots on the ground work by the CPDs and the recommendations and standards put out by the council. If there isn't close coordination and common understanding, I just don't see how this is ultimately going to work. And the bar plays a critically important role in that, in really setting that standard, in setting the tone and setting the approach. I would encourage you to engage with judges who will take a similar approach. And again, I'm not just speaking for myself, I am speaking for the speaker here, that it's important for them to be invested as well. But they've got to, again, be individuals who are invested and see the big picture on this, who understand that it's not one-sided. It's about striking a balance. Not that that's easy. It's terribly difficult. But they have to see the whole picture. The Chief Justice, I will tell you, I've been personally, I'm very positive on her approach. And I think a lot of people around here are positive on the approach that she takes with some of the issues that we're all facing, of course, budgetary being the first one. The Chief Justice, I think, is someone who I know I would take guidance from in terms of approach on things, and of people who I think have a similar approach, a similar mindset. Now, that being said, I haven't spoken to her about that, and she just may say, no, thank you. But as the leader of that branch of government, I know that we over here would be very interested in having either her or people around her, or her appointees perhaps, who we know will take a measured, and that's the key word, measured approach on the issue, to be invested and to be part of that macro conversation. So I'd welcome any comments you have, and I assume you're as committed as the other leaders for that goal.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. I would state that your points are well spoken and understood. The bar is committed to working collaboratively with the other stakeholders, groups, particularly these individuals and who they represent at the table here today. The vice chair of this committee, Nikki Vaughn, has already been working with them. I know she's met with you, particularly over the last few weeks, to work toward a practical solution that meets both, obviously, the constitutional requirements and the ethical obligations that the various attorneys have. So we hear you, and we understand.
Thank you. I hope that your patience with our proceedings this morning have been rewarded by not going any longer than we've gone right now. I appreciate your commitment to this process between now and December 31st. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be in close contact with all three of you. We will set out, again, we're not mandating anything, but it's our sense that it would be productive if we set out a schedule of working meetings to figure out where we are in terms of process. And I know Mr. Robinson has got something of a framework, if not more of a framework, for going forward. I know that perhaps that has to be vetted by the other relevant leaders here and their organizations.
We have, as of the council meeting last Friday, adopted a working plan for conflicts that was worked through CPDs and the CPD committee.
And we appreciate that. And to the extent that the bar obviously could and should be a part of that conversation, I would suggest that we, over the course of the balance of the year between now and December 31st, which is our magic day, work in a very deliberate manner toward coming up with that consensus solution so that we can come up with a good quality work product that we can all support. I think that's the best thing for the system. It's the best thing for the taxpayers. And it certainly will make our lives easier, won't it? So with that, I want to thank you for being here. We'll be in contact as soon as we all decompress after the session. And unless any member of the committee has anything else, we'll be adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Occasionally I try.
Shelley.